Thank you, Chair. We are now live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's Planning and Environmental Protection Committee. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's YouTube page. Due to government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. A decision summary and the minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the minutes will be available to view on the Council's YouTube page. To enable the meeting to run in an orderly manner, I would ask all members of the committee to keep their video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep their microphone muted except when I ask you to speak. Officers will join us to introduce the reports in the usual way. If you wish to speak, then please raise the virtual hand, which is the blue hand and is located at the bottom of your participants section. Some people may have a newer version of Zoom, in which case the raised hand function has moved from the participants section to the reactions section and is now yellow. Whichever version you are using, please ensure you use the raised hands function to indicate that you wish to speak. As with all new arrangements, especially those involving new systems, there's always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and if we do, I'd ask for your patience. Should this occur, we'll declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may have to be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I'll begin the meeting by doing a roll call of members of the committee. If members please confirm their attendance. Councillor Bond.
Hello, Chair. Yes, I'm here, but I'm having a few issues turning my camera on, just so you're aware.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Casey.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, present, Chair, thank you.
Councillor Hogg.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Jamil.
Here.
Councillor Jones.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Rush.
Present.
Councillor Warren.
Present.
And myself, Councillor Harper, in attendance too. We also have in attendance Nick Harding, Head of Planning, Stephen Turnbull, the Planning Solicitor, Nick Reeves, the Highways Officer, and members of the Democratic Services team. Item 1 then is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Hussain and Councillor Jamil as attending a substitute.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jamil, for standing in. Item 2 then is declarations of interest. No, none of those. Item 3 then is declaration to make representation as the ward councillor. Okay, at this point I must raise my hand, and for items 5.2 and 5.3 I will be addressing committee as a ward councillor, and obviously I'll be standing away for that vote. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting for the 24th of November 2020. We are being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting as a correct record. Can I ask for a proposer and a seconder, please? Councillor Jamil? No. Councillor Hiller?
Yes, Chair, happy to propose.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I'll second it.
Thank you. Are there any objections to the minutes at all? No, I don't see any objections, so the minutes are agreed and we'll move on. Item 5 is development control and enforcement matters, and the first one is item 5.1, which relates to the Gusha Mosque on 406 Gladstone Street, Millfield, and will be presented by Mr. Harding when you're ready, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Move to the next slide, please. So the extent of the application site is edged in red on this drawing. If we go to the next slide. And this shows the minaret where the 4 loudspeakers are proposed to be located, and they're going to be located so that they're not visible from view and located behind the screens that you can see at the top of the minaret. When planning permission was first granted for the mosque, a condition was put on that planning permission which prevented an amplified call to prayer being made. And the application before committee today is seeking to overturn that condition so that an amplified call to prayer can be made. So the proposal is to place the loudspeakers in one of the minarets, 4 speakers in total, and there will be 3 calls to prayer on each day, and each call to prayer would last between 3 and 5 minutes. The proposal is to have the call to prayer in the early afternoon, the late afternoon, and also at sunset. The proposal itself, as submitted to the council as part of the planning application, didn't identify how loud the call to prayer was going to be, but instead was looking at the council, if it felt it could grant planning permission, it was looking to the council to set the maximum noise limit that would be applied to any consent. Some councils in some parts of the country have allowed amplified calls to prayer to take place as part of the planning permission regime, and others have not as a matter of principle. Leicester City Council has guidance which indicates that certain noise levels, and that's referred to in your committee report papers, I think it's 70 dB, and a duration which it considers could be workable and not be detrimental to residential amenity. However, the starting point in the consideration of an application such as this has to be whether or not the introduction of the noise source is going to be acceptable. So that's a matter of principle. So from the officer's perspective, we consider that this proposal for an amplified call to prayer would result in the introduction of a new and very different noise source, which would stand out against the general thrum of the urban background noise. And it's on this basis that the proposal is considered to bring about an unacceptable noise impact on the amenity of the area. And therefore, we are recommending the refusal of the application, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. So, members, we have 3 people registered to speak. Please can I invite the ward councillors, Councillor Ali and Councillor Nadeem, to begin to address committee in a moment. You will have 10 minutes between you. If we could start with Councillor Ali. So please address committee, 10 minutes between you. The Democratic Service Officer will let you know when you have 30 seconds left towards the end of your 10 minutes. So please make the most of your 5 minutes or so each. When you're ready, please unmute your mic, Councillor Ali, and begin.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all keeping well and safe in these difficult and challenging times. Good to see all of you. Members, I am very proud and privileged to represent a ward which is very diverse and which gives me a great sense of pride. And we have people living in there from different backgrounds who get on well together. We don't have the challenges and the tensions some of the other cities experience. And that's what makes me proud of living in the city of Peterborough for 51 years now. And I've never had any intention to leave, although I have worked in various parts of the country, but I've always made Peterborough my home because I'm proud of the city and what it stands for in terms of it celebrates diversity, it encourages people to express their viewpoints as long as they're not imposing on other people. And most of our communities at all times do respect that, and they work very well with us. As with this application from Masjid Gausia, it sits in my ward, and as Nick has said, it is they've been looking for the council to actually give them some advice, how in terms of the reach of the voice. So hopefully we can work around that. Basically, it is a sincere wish of many members of the Muslim community. I've been also told and also spoken at length to the committee, and in particular the chairman of the committee, Nazim Khan, who's here and will address the committee as well. And they have assured me that it has been an express request from many in the community, especially during these challenging times, to have a call to prayer on the loudspeakers, and it will only cover, the reach is only for a small area, the east of the city up to Lincoln Road, west to the Borges Boulevard. That's as far as their intention is, I'm told. And in that particular area, the vast majority of the people living are Muslim. And I've spoken to many people in that area from other faiths and non-faiths, and who have also told me that they have no objection to this application. And I believe I forwarded 2 particular emails from residents on Lincoln Road, which I hope members have had a chance to read, from Jonathan Theobald and also Carol Payton. So, you can just sense how people value and appreciate and celebrate different viewpoints. I know as the process dictates, our planning department, rightly following the process, sent letters to the residents that were going to be affected. And I was very, very pleased with the responses that we have received. Generally, Mr. Chairman, I think most of those members who are present and the planning department will be aware more than anyone else that usually when we are consulting in that part of the area, the responses are very, very minimal. People are a bit laid back. So my guess is that I think that, maybe of all the responses that were received, maybe half of them were from the local residents because they feel so passionate, and many of the others were generated through the application being put on our website, and also the Peterborough Telegraph putting this on their website as well. And I'm sure many of you saw some of the comments on there, the usual keyboard warriors who have never ever said anything kind about the community in Millfield. Whenever there is an issue that comes in the paper, often you had some of those intolerable people commenting the area should be bombed. They should be sent back home. It's the same people who are making those comments. And to actually add fuel to this reaction of hate with this application, a group from London, again, I believe my colleague, Councillor Shazia Bashir, has sent you an email with a leaflet that was being distributed on the west of the city. And she actually confronted those young people who are being paid to deliver these leaflets in the west of the city in an area where there will be no impact whatsoever. No impact whatsoever. So my guess is that leaflet was designed to incite people from outside the area of the impact to actually send in their objections. And I think many of those objections came via that direction. I think that we as a council, we have a history of making decisions that many other councils have been afraid to make. And that's what makes me proud of this city. We've got beautiful mosques in this city, which have become a tourist attraction. And my colleagues, I have also a great privilege of hosting many of these visits to our local mosques. Haven't done so since the pandemic, unfortunately, because the mosques are closed. And the best thing I've ever volunteered for is hosting non-Muslims to our local mosques. And quite often I post these visits on my Facebook page as well. And often the comments from our visitors are very, very positive. The usual, many people comment, my God, I didn't know that as a non-Muslim I would be allowed in a mosque. That's the sort of misunderstanding that exists within our society. With applications like this, And when people have visited, basically, this has been included groups like Women's Institute and King's Cliff Old Boys Club, to name a few, universities.
Early, 6 minutes.
Etc. They all
Please give me a few minutes.
And they made positive comments. So I urge you, colleagues, I urge you again to make a decision to grant this application, work with Masjid Ghosia, and I think we can make this happen. And I can assure you, many in the community that are going to be affected are going to be very, very grateful to you, and they will embrace it. My final point to you is that Liam Neeson, an actor that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, he was shooting his last
Not much time left for me.
Istanbul, and you can Google this if you wish. And he was interviewed. In that interview, he spent more time talking about listening to the azan. And he said in the first week, it sounded quite strange. And after that, it grew on him, and it was such a beautiful sound. These are the words of a guy who was a Roman Catholic when you heard. And I feel absolutely sure and confident that people in Peterborough, particularly those affected in that area, would welcome this call to prayer. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dean, please don't shout in. I understand your frustration, but there is a raised hand function which I told you about. Please, Councillor Ali, you've not got too much time, but Councillor Mohammed Nadeem, I'll give you as much as I can. Please carry on.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. My fellow councillor, he's a radio presenter, and it's very, very hard job to bring the mic back. But anyway, good afternoon, Chair and everyone, and pray and hope you are well during the challenging times. Mr. Chair, I would like to bring into this committee's attention and make clear that I'm not supporting this application based on it being in my ward, nor am I supporting it as a user of this mosque. I am supporting this application based on principle and endless calls received from my constituents showing their passion to support the application. I am not going to read out a statement which we normally do in a committee meeting, but I would like to comment on some points raised in the report. I sincerely hope that the respected committee members will consider these points before coming to make a final decision on this application. Mr. Chair, on page 2, local plan talks about transport, parking standards, and amenity provision, which I believe are irrelevant to attach to this application, as all these points were addressed when the mosque was built, and all these points were addressed when planning permission was granted to build this masjid. If this application is granted, to mosque will not overflow to its capacity. I do believe this is a noise issue. Therefore, our Peterborough City Council Noise and Pollution team has made their comprehensive representation. On page 3, Mr. Chair, they have said that the information submitted in this application is limited, such as a noise survey, etc. And then on page 4, paragraph 2, they have contradicted themselves by saying, in relation to this development, engaging a noise consultant at the application stage does not provide any additional confidence for the local authority to be able to base their decision upon. I really do appreciate the officer comments of granting temporary permission. Respected committee members, as we all know, under the Equality Act 2010 and Human Rights Act 1998, the council must have due regard to the need to eliminate discrimination and advance equality of opportunity to implement this. This regard has been given the public sector, including race, religion, etc. Finally, Mr. Chair, as per the pollution team's recommendation on page 3, last paragraph,
30 seconds left.
They stated a loudspeaker for the proposed purpose is primarily a political judgment rather than a technical consideration. I mean, I agree with you, Chair, that no politics in this committee meeting, but I couldn't disagree as predominantly this has been passed for vote. We have 288 in support and 92 objection. So on behalf of my North Ward constituent, my humble request to this committee that please approve this application. Thank you, Chair. Happy to answer any question.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Okay, members, we've had the address by the two councillors in the ward. Any questions, please? No questions. Okay, thank you very much, councillors. Okay, we'll move on then to, we have a member of the public, and that's Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, are you ready? I'll take it. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Khan, when you're ready to address committee.
Yeah, good afternoon, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Can I just start off by saying the recommendation from member officers? I think what they're sort of putting the objection on is LP 17. Now that quite clearly says about a bit of noise pollution, but on the other hand, they are saying that it's not an officer's decision, it's a political decision. So I'll take you through to a bit of background, Mr. Chairman. All the decisions that were made from 2000 until 2018 regarding the build of this mosque, if we as members or the officers would have agreed the officers' recommendation, that mosque at Glasson Street would never have been built, because they were all vehemently against that proposal, because they were saying it's in the housing state, city, you know, and this will overbear the street scene. But in their report, what the officers are saying now is the building is locally listed due to distinctive architecture, which forms an important part of the street scene, and it's a local landmark site. Now, you probably be aware, back in when we built this mosque, we achieved a national award for best building built in Peterborough. So that was a browning point for us as well as local authority. Up to now, Mr. Chairman, what we did not do at all is to do anything that went against our local community, against our local political or officers. We always try to work with the local authority officers as well as politicians. And that is the reason that we put in the application, because this is new to us. And we were looking an engagement from the officers that how best can we, approach this decision. But unfortunately, we didn't get that request agreed by the officers. If that would have been the case, I think you would have seen probably a slight different officer's recommendation. However, Mr. Chairman, my colleague, my member, Mr. Nadeem, talked about officers, particularly the pollution team. So if you are with us on that, Mr. Chairman, what we are recommending or requesting you to do is to grant us a temporary proposal, and then we can work with the officers and our local area residents. If there are any issues, we will try to resolve. But on the other hand, if there is a vehement objection to the call of prayer, then we will be the first one to say to our members and officers, we are very, very sorry, but we can't continue with it because we are having quite a lot of opposition from our residents. The last thing that we want to do is to alienate our neighbors and our residents. That is not our intention. Our intention is to carry all those residents with us. Now, and what I'm seeking, Mr. Chairman, is that if a temporary approval is granted by the members, we are seeking round about, say, 18 months or 12 months to 18 months. For the simple reason is that if we do go any shorter, it will not give us any the good time to see the real impact, because we have different timing for prayer call in summer and different timing for call of prayer in the winter. So if there is a short time of temporary application, then we will not see the full result of the impact that we'll have. And as I said, Mr. Chairman, I can go along with that conclusion, if you like.
30 seconds left.
Mr. Chairman, but I'll keep it to that, and I'll say this is that, look, just give us the opportunity to prove to ourselves, as well as yourself and the officers, that we can work together. And as I said earlier on, is that if there is quite a few people objecting within our area, we are concerned is that our neighbors and within our area, outside the area, you will have people opposing it. I'm not interested in that. But our interest is that we will actually look out for the residents of within the area. And I do hope that you will make a decision that will have an impact for the Muslim community and local community in a positive manner rather than in a negative manner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. Members have any questions, please, for Mr. Khan? Councillor Rush, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Khan.
Good afternoon, sir.
Could you please confirm what times of the day the call to prayer will be made, please?
That's what I said earlier on, is that there's different timing in the winter and there's different timing in the summer. But to start up with, the first call that we are asking for is the mid-afternoon one. In the winter, that will happen around about 12:30, 1:45. And in the summer, that will happen around about 1 o'clock, 1:30, because the prayer time is 2 o'clock. For the mid-afternoon one, it changes, it goes along. So in the winter time, in the summertime, that will be around 6:30, I believe, 6:30, 7:45. And the winter time, it'll be about 2:30, 2:15. And the last one that we are seeking is that this winter time, it will be around about 4 o'clock time. And the summertime, it will be the sunset sometime, because of the longer day, the last call, the sunset will be about 9:30, something like that.
Thank you. Chair, could I have another question, please?
Yes, of course.
Have you given any consideration for shift workers?
Call of prayer is nothing to do with the shift workers. It's specifically set for a time. And you can only call for prayer at set time. So there is no, I don't know what you mean by shift workers.
What I mean to say, people who work, say, night shift, when they're asleep in the day shift, call to prayer could disrupt their sleep pattern in the daytime. Have you given any consideration to that?
We have. I mean, as I said to in your, in our report, is that call to prayer will be around about between 2 minutes or 3 minutes to 5 minutes, and the noise level, that we are looking for is within that area, and that is why we are leaving our mind open. If there is, I mean, I know particularly the Muslim community would welcome, call to prayer, and we will have some other people who will not. So that is why we're saying is that, look, if we've been given the chance, we can work out, and if there is a opposition to it, we can look at it.
Thank you. Could I have another one, please, Chair?
Yes, of course. Councillor.
The mosque has been used for many years now without call to prayer. Why now?
Two reasons. One is that, we got an aging community before. You had people who were in work, who were going there to do duty. Now that we have quite a few people who are retired, quite a few people who are unemployed. And really the idea is that, when they are out and about, sometimes they don't have the watch, or they do, but they don't know the time. So the call to prayer is just to give a gentle reminder that it's a time for call of prayer. And also, actually, at last year during the lockdown, when the Ramadan was taking place, there was quite a lot of people, particularly the younger ones, saying, why don't we have a call for prayer, particularly in this lockdown area? And that actually, got people talking, and hence that's the reason that we came to yourselves. We did ask a temporary permission without planning permission during the Ramadan last year, and it was turned down, saying that the officers couldn't make a decision without the planning application. Because of month of Ramadan, we couldn't do it. So we decided that we'll put the application in and seek members or officers' approval on this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hogg.
So Councillor Rush has asked a lot of the questions I wanted to ask. So have you looked at other alternatives to the use of speakers? Obviously, technology is advanced now. We've got apps on phones. There's the possibility of using local radio to be able to use the call to prayer instead. What do you have to say about that?
Can I just say, for the local radio, the majority of the people who are sitting inside do not have actually these days or listen to the radios. It's either the TV, mainly the TV these days. Hardly, we have a local radio, but I don't listen to it, And the other the other thing is that we have an elderly community who are not geared up with the new technology. We young people, yeah, they are at work, they can use the mobile app and so on and so forth. Basically, what we are kind of looking at is the elderly community that we serve. And also, historically, if you look at, I know we are in UK, but if you look at any Islamic country, the ethos of having a mosque, the main ethos is a call for prayer. The reason that we didn't go or decided before, we didn't feel comfortable that we could carry people with us, but we feel now that we may be able to do it now.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Hogg?
No, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just in a theme, can you just, for my benefit of the Azan, you mentioned before the timing would change between 2 and 5 minutes. Does that go with the time of day? Does that go with the time of year? Why is it a different time between 2, 3 and 5 minutes as has been mentioned, please?
The call of prayer depends on the person who's calling. There are some people that would call for the prayer slightly quicker, yeah? And some people, they're kind of a bit relaxed and they call it slowly. So that is why we are saying it is between 2 minutes to 5 minutes. But since the application, we put the application in, I've been actually monitoring the people who are sort of calling out for prayer. The maximum, that I time want is 2.5 minutes. So nobody's gone above 2-3 minutes. So within 2.5 minutes, call of prayer has been finished.
Okay.
Chair. So is 5 minutes? Could somebody stretch it to 5 minutes if, for instance, they were, to coin a phrase, on a roll? Or are you saying that generally 2 to 3 minutes would be the call to prayer?
I'll be very, very surprised if somebody stretches to 5 minutes. I think the maximum that they could stretch if they want to go relax is 3 minutes or 3.5. They won't go more than that. Not within the locality that we are in. If you go into the Islamic countries, they're slightly different. But as I say, I've been actually monitoring it myself since we put the application in. And we got an elderly gentleman who calls for prayer on a permanent basis. And the maximum time he takes is 2.5 minutes. So he's either 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes. He's not gone about 2.5 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Khan, there's 5 prayers. Can you tell us why you've excluded the other 2?
Well, the first one is the very, very early in the morning. We know that comes around about 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 3 o'clock in the morning. And that is the reason that we say is that we do not want kind of a call for prayer, because majority of people at that time are asleep or and the last one during the summertime, the call of prayer is at around about 11 o'clock at night, sometime later, particularly in summer. So we don't want to have an issue at 11 o'clock. That is why we are seeking just 3 times a day rather than 5 times.
Chair, can I come back?
Yes, of course.
Mr. Khan, so obviously, you know, our office has told us that in some places there is permission to do it. So what research have you done and where? And what was the outcome? Did you contact committees? How did you move forward with it?
The only consultation I've done was that I went to Bradford. There's a new mosque was built, and they seeked planning permission, and they've got planning permission, and they're doing it. And I actually heard it myself. That was the midday call. I was there one day, and actually that was the officers are actually right, and the sound system. You know, we have to look at. Maybe we need to go there, and the sound that was coming out was so smooth, so it wasn't loud, but you can hear that the call was being called. So, you know, we could look at that as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, so how does your community or the community deal with the situation at the moment? How do they know when to pray, kind of thing? Thanks.
At the moment, what we have is a paper version of timetable. We kind of put it on kind of Facebook. We give it to people, and that has monthly timetable for the prayers. But what it doesn't do, it doesn't tell them is when the call will be called. So it probably give you the time for the prayer. For instance, in the summertime, midday prayer is 1 o'clock. Yeah, but the call of prayer is around about 10 or 15 minutes before. But on the timetable, it will just say the time of the prayer is 1 o'clock. So there is no kind of, people can't hear that there is no call, what time is the call. So the reason that you get call about 10 minutes, or in some cases 15 minutes early, is that people know that it's time, so they get preparation, prepare it, do the wudu and everything else, and then make their way to the mosque if they want to.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. I understand now.
Councillor Jones again, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just on Councillor Ali, when he was speaking before, was saying about the distance, Lincoln Road, between Lincoln Road and Bourges Boulevard, notwithstanding wind or whatever. When you went to Bradford, I think Nick Harding said that it's either 70 or 75 decibels, the maximum. What did you find when you went to Bradford in terms of the distance? You said it was very smooth. You know, is there any guidance around the decibel level and the distance that it travelled from that mosque when it was when planning permission was granted?
I mean, the decibel, I don't know what the decibel, to be quite honest with you, means. And that was the reason we were saying to the officers, let's sit down and work out sound noise level that we can both work together. Officers feel comfortable with it. We feel comfortable with it. The call for prayer that I heard from Bradford was, I think it was about, say, our mosque is at Gladstone Street, and I would have been standing at the recreation ground on New England. You know, our round about that kind of distance. But I couldn't hear a very loud noise. I could hear very dim noise. So that's how far I was at that time.
Thank you. Councillor Hillett.
Thank you, Chair. Question for Mr. Carr. In your previous response to Councillor Jones, I think it was, or perhaps it was Councillor Bond, I can't remember. Anyway, you distributed a timetable currently to let people know when the calls to prayer, the prayer itself is going to be held. But if, for argument's sake, it may be a simplistic question, but if for argument's sake the call is for 1 o'clock in the afternoon, why don't you simply put arrive at 12:45 or something along those lines? Is that not feasible, possible?
I think anything is feasible and possible, Councillor Taylor, but the fundamental is the call. Many people do not have the timetable. Yeah? Many people, I think, what we are kind of targeting the audience is people who are out and about. Sometimes people don't always carry the timetable with them. So the really idea is that if they are out and about, that just gives them a reminder that it's time for the prayer, come to mosque.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, as there are no more questions, we'll move to questions for officers or the legal team. Anybody got any questions? Councillor Jamil.
Yeah, question for Nick. I see in the consultation papers there's reference made to Leicester City Council. Did officers speak to them? Did they go down and hear the prayers? Can you tell me what actually happened between yourselves and Leicester City Council?
Thank you. Through you, Chairman. All we have done through our consultation with our environmental health colleagues here at PCC is get information about the guidance that the environmental health team at Leicester City Council, we've just had sight of their guidance, in effect. That's it. We've not visited Leicester or spoken to them at length on the issue.
Okay, Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Nick. This issue of distance of noise, can anybody say how far this noise will travel? Because we're trying to make a decision on the planning application without the proper information.
Through you, Chairman, no, we can't. The application itself didn't put forward a noise level that it considered was appropriate to have as an output from the facility, and neither did it indicate at the nearest noise sensitive premises what the noise from the speakers would read as a noise level at that premises. So we've had none of that information at all. As I said during my presentation, the applicant has simply put the application in and sought, and this isn't a criticism, they've sought to have a discussion with us if we felt the principle was acceptable over what level of noise output could be delivered from the loudspeakers and what the maximum noise level should be at the nearest noise sensitive premise. So as per the report to you, that identifies the guidance used by Leicester City Council. So if members were minded to agree that as a matter of principle, the development would be acceptable, then as officers, we would look to use the guidance as used by sort of Leicester on what the maximum noise levels would be at the nearest noise sensitive premises. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Nick. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Is why Leicester when obviously there are other authorities doing this? Question for you, Nick. Is there any sort of national guidance, or would Bradford be another sort of case study? I'm not saying you have to go, but would you do any empirical sort of studies to find out just exactly what was going on elsewhere, and particularly in terms of the demographic and the geography? I'll top off.
Thank you. Through you, Chairman. There is no national guidance with regard to this, and as mentioned in the comments from the environmental health team, there's no standard practice national methodology for assessing the noise impact from this type of noise source. The challenges are that it's at different times of day, different duration, different tones, so on and so forth, which makes it a very difficult matter to make a scientific assessment of. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nick, could you just explain why officers have used the term "it's a political decision" for me, please, so people understand?
Through you, we didn't write that from the planning officer's point of view. That was included within the comments of environmental health. So I think in essence what they're saying is that because of the difficulties of applying a scientific approach to this, for the reasons I've mentioned already, they can't really arrive at a scientifically based recommendation to you, and hence maybe that's why they've said it's sort of a political decision with a small p that needs to be made. So I think it's about the principle of this. So as you know, the recommendation is for refusal, and it's about the principle of the introduction of a noise source that it is not part of the existing soundscape of the city. So what members may do is disagree with that and say it's no different to the general soundscape being punctuated on occasion by, for example, emergency vehicle sirens, as an example. This is no different. It's punctuation of the soundscape by the call to prayer. It's of short duration, only happens 3 times a day, and therefore the impacts on amenity are acceptable. That could be a conclusion that committee members could make. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining. I just wanted to make it clear that we don't do politics in planning, and using that word can be misconstrued. It's up for members. We're all independent when we're on planning, so I don't like the word political. Anyway, thank you for explaining. It's not yours, it's other people's words. Councillor Iqbal. Is he there? Or you're the first 2021 to be on mute.
Oh, sorry, am I on mute? Sorry, Chair. Through you. I personally agree with Councillor Nadim's view regarding the PCC pollution team's report. I find it contradictory. If I read the report, the way they set up the report, the conclusion from there should be that they should be given a temporary permission. But in their conclusion, they actually go against it. So I just wanted Nick's view on that. Does he agree with my findings and Councillor Nadim's findings?
Thank you, and through you, Chairman. The environmental health team, because of this issue of them not being able to have a noise report in front of them that they can assess against a standardised methodology which is nationally accepted, to help them reach a conclusion. That's why they've not been able to do what they normally do for us. What they would normally do is look at a technical report, assess it against best practice, and advise us accordingly. But because of the nature of this noise source, they're not able to do that. And just to reiterate, this isn't a criticism of the applicant, not a jot of it. It's just a situation that we're in. What the environmental health team have said is that if committee is minded to grant consent, then there is a route by which conditions could be applied using the Leicester City Council guidance that could be used to set an appropriate noise limit. And they've gone on to identify the other sort of background measures that would need to be put in place should planning permission be granted. So, for example, that would be the fact that a suitable noise limiting system would have to be installed at the premises. It would have to be calibrated by a noise consultant and be effectively tamper-proof. And that's not a slant against the applicants, but these things have to be tamper-proof so that they can be sort of relied on to be able to do their job. And that could be a way forward, and that has been suggested by environmental health. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I suppose the query I've got is about setting a precedent, but also a cumulative impact. Have any studies been done? Say this set off a chain reaction. We had each mosque doing the same thing. Would they all be at the same time, or would they try and time it at different times? What would be the impact of that?
Thank you, and through you, Chairman. Every application that we get needs to be considered on its merits, and the issue of precedent is all around us making consistent decision making where the application and the circumstances are as good as identical. If we were to approve this application, if it were, for example, to be approved on a full-time basis rather than on a temporary basis, if we were to get a subsequent application, then what we would have to do is say, well, the principle has been accepted, i.e. the townscape being punctuated by the call to prayer noise, and it would be a question of whether or not the noise emitted from the example that we know of, whether or not that in combination with the proposed additional call to prayer would have a detrimental effect or not. Obviously, rolling back to something I just said in answering your question is, and going back to what might appear at first sight to be an inappropriate example, but it's the best one that I can think of, is if you had a part of the city and that had one emergency vehicle passing through on 3 occasions at different times of the day, and you had a completely different part of the city, some way remote from the first example, and the same thing was happening, then I don't think you could say that there would be a cumulative effect. However, if you had 2 areas of the city side by side, and each of them were having the emergency vehicle passing through 3 times a day, but each area could hear each other's emergency vehicles passing through, then that would start to have a cumulative effect. That's the best way I can think of explaining it, Chairman.
No, thank you very much. Councillor Jamil.
Yeah, I was thinking along those lines as well, because each application we consider on its merits anyway. I presume that Leicester would have been in the same position because there's more mosques in Leicester and they've given permission. you know, I'm coming back to that again because obviously they're ahead of us in this process, and therefore, do we know whether they've split between the mosques, or do we know anything more than what you've said earlier?
Through you, Chairman, I personally don't consider that to be sort of relevant to the application we've got before us. You know, we have the application proposal on the table here, and we've got to determine it on the basis of this scheme. We can't be deciding this application on the basis of what may happen subsequently in other parts of the city, distant or close by to this particular site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions for our officers at all? No, then we will move to, thank you, Nick, for your answers. We'll move to debate. Who would like to start that off, please? Councillor Hogg, please.
Obviously got in there first. This is a very tricky issue, as Councillor Ali has suggested, that the community, although probably the majority of which are Muslim, it is still a diverse community. He also stated that, you know, that you weren't seeking to impose anything on the whole community. I am mindful of the fact that this application is for 3 times a day. I believe it's 5 times a week, 5 days a week. And as has been already touched on by Councillor Rush in his questions, people that work shift work, having some sort of noise go off, even if it is only for a number of minutes, is enough to disturb somebody's sleep. In my earlier years doing shift work, there was an industrial unit near to the section house that used to have a buzzer go off at precisely 11 o'clock every day. And when you did a week of nights, it ended up by the end of the week being quite annoying to be woken up only having had sort of 3 or 4 hours sleep, to then have to go back to sleep again. So I am mindful of the fact that that there will be people in that situation who are working on shift work who will be disturbed by the noise. As lovely as it may be, it's not going to be sort of a klaxon or anything, but nonetheless, it will break people's sleep. And you know, the fact that it's 5 times a week, 3 times a day, for me is too many times. Basically, I think if the application had been for, you know, 1 day a week, or for significant religious festivals or holidays, Eid or what have you, or the 2 Eids, should I say, then I would, you know, then maybe that's the softer way in to see, you know, we've been taught that there was talk of some sort of temporary allowance for 12 months or 18 months, that if there was a way of easing it in more gently than straight into 5 days a week, 15 times a week, these alarms these calls to prayer coming off, I would be more sympathetic to that as an idea. But for me, the noise scenario with you know, people that are going about their daily business, especially in the summertime when you've got the windows open, it's very hot. So from my mind, I'm not sure that I can really go against what is the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I would like to go against the officer's recommendation to the extent that a temporary permission is granted for a period of 2 years to give the scheme a trial run for the following reasons. First of all, Peterborough Highway Services have no objections. PCC Conservation Officer has no objections. Millfield and New England Residents Planning Subgroup have made no comments in favour or against. Local residents, interested parties, initial consultation was about 232. Total number of responses, 384. Total number of objections, 92. Total number in support, 288. All 3 ward councillors are in support. More importantly, I would like to rely on the report. The PCC pollution team in their report are supportive for a temporary permission. The report states it may be appropriate to grant a temporary permission in order to give the development a trial run, provided that such a permission would be reasonable, having regard to the capital expenditure necessary to carry out the development. The PCC pollution team in their report also suggests that the noise consultant report would not prove beneficial if a permanent permission were given from the outset. The report states, if a permanent permission is to be given from the outset, a noise consultant would not add great value to the consideration of the proposal. Now, if you look at the of the scheme, I mean, we have to take into consideration that we have to ensure that the proper regard is given to the Equality Act 2020, the Human Rights Act 1998, and the public and applicants' interests are properly protected, considered and applied. Most importantly, they are not outweighed in a disproportionate manner. The scheme will not set an undesirable precedent, as each application, as we know, sitting on the planning committee for a long time, is and will be considered in its own merits. The report mentions Section 62 of the Control and Pollution Act 1974, which regulates the use of speakers. Now, I've had a look at the section in particular. As far as I understand, Section 62 of the Control and Pollution Act 1974, it is not applicable to this scheme as it clearly relates to the noise in streets. If I may read out the section for debate and information purposes, it states that, subject to the provision of the section, a loudspeaker in a street shall not be operated between the hours of 9 in the evening and 8 in the following morning for any purpose, at any time, other time, for the purpose of advertising, any entertainment, trade or business, and any person who operates or permits the operation of a loudspeaker in contravention of the subsection shall be guilty of an offence against this part of this Act. Now, the Act also actually gives a definition of the street, and it states a street means a highway and any other road, footway, square or court which is for the time being open to the public. So the mosque doesn't fall within that definition. As a whole, I mean, listening to everybody's statements, submissions, I will state that on a balance, I would suggest a temporary permission is the appropriate way forward, as it will give us, the committee, a further opportunity to reassess the permanent or temporary renewal application when the mosque makes. The concerned members of the public will also be given an opportunity to raise their concerns relating to noise disturbance resulting from the amplification of the call prayer. So I take into account everything. We want to go against the officer's recommendation to an extent that a temporary permission is granted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Iqbal. Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I myself agreeing, I have to say, with Councillor Hogg on this issue, and I listened very closely to Councillor Iqbal and his interpretation of various acts and take on this mosque, and I agree, it's a beautiful building. It really is a beautiful building, but it is within a residential area, a densely residential street. And also it's advertising. It is advertising a call to prayer. What else is it unless it is advertising? Chair, I don't imagine many would disagree with the right of all responsible members of a free society to go about their lawful activities without detriment to anybody else's way of life or indeed amenity. Our city is culturally diverse. We're all aware of that as councillors, and respect for our neighbours' customs, beliefs, languages, and of course different religious practices should paramount, I think, to the continuance of that. But it should be, I think, in a peaceful and cohesive manner, and I repeat the term peaceful. We have a way of life here which is admirable in Peterborough, and what we do well, and I think it's appreciated by the very many residents and all different makes.
Councillor, we've lost you. Do you want to start again?
Have you? It's probably
just about 30 seconds of it, if you wouldn't mind. We've got most of it.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. It's the vagaries of rural broadband. I'm afraid, Chair. We are an environmental protection committee. I think
we've lost you again, I'm afraid.
Let me hold on.
Maybe take your camera off, and is it perfect?
Yeah. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, so far, yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. The call to prayer is a loud broadcast. It's a broadcast in all directions across the city. It's 3 times a day. We hear every day the amenity of others. I think the quiet enjoyment of other people's daily lives will be impacted upon 3 times a day for most of the year. I note the supporting comments cite freedom of speech and freedom to exercise religion. I think that's laudable, of course, but and it's an interesting argument because the opposing view also cited that it elevates one religion above others and it imposes a single faith via amplified broadcast 3 times daily, 5 days a week on others of different faiths. So I think we need to be very cognizant of that. I'm sure there are many others who will consider this also as the thin end of a very thick wedge. I mean, we've had this mentioned, given the other mosques in the area. Chair, I don't personally feel that the recommended refusal of this application in accord with our officers' advice is designed to oppress any religious practice. I mean, let's bear in mind this mosque has operated successfully for the last 16 or 17 years without these broadcasts. It was determined some years ago when the original consent for the mosque was approved that there shouldn't be any amplified broadcasting across the city. I fail to see how much has changed to warrant this happening now. Again, I have to say, our officers are also concerned with the setting of a precedent. I think that Nick Harding has made that point. If indeed this was permitted, other mosques may want to transmit amplified messages similarly, and I think it would be very difficult to refuse. So adding to the regular and perhaps some might say persistent sound. Chair, no members of this committee need reminding that we're here to decide applications on planning grounds alone, and a qualified and a reasoned refusal, I think, is a protection of the amenity of many who want to maintain the current status quo and respect all citizens as equals in the free, I think, in the democratic society that we are lucky enough to live in Peterborough City. And that's all I have to say at the moment, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hiller. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think having been, I guess, fortunate to work in a largely Christian city with a large Muslim community, and first hearing the call to prayer very early in the morning, I know that's not the case here, and getting used to it, and after a while did completely get used to it. There's a part of me, if you like, the conservative man in me is thinking about obviously setting precedents and the rest of it. The other side of it is the curious man in me. And part of this is, you know, I'm aware that the Azan is very uplifting for a large part of the community there. And I think my curiosity is just about edging out my conservatism, if you will. And one of the things that I would be interested, the one thing that struck me earlier on was the amount of time that it would take. And I think where it was going between 2 minutes and 5 minutes, but Mr. Khan was saying we're talking 2.5 minutes, I would be willing, along with my fellow councillors, to be open, I hope, open-minded enough to see whether this was intrusive, whether it punctuated the soundscape, whether the mosque itself, working with the local community and the local authority, could come to an elegant solution that sees the evolution of this mosque. Like I say, it would never have been built. Sometimes we just have to take out our filters and have a look at something from a slightly different perspective. And I hope that that's the way that how I'm speaking now will be seen, and people will be open-minded enough to say, let's give it a try, whether it's for a year, whether it's for, I think we'd have to give it, as Mr. Khan was saying, at least 12 months so that we can have a complete cycle. Whether it needs to be any longer than that, I will be guided by, my peers on this. So I'm trying to be as open-minded, as receptive to the world that we're living as I possibly can.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Hogg.
I just wanted to further add a couple of points to my previous statement. The fact remains that this mosque has been in operation for, if not 20 years, then close to 20 years, and has been, as previously said, a very successful mosque, without the need or without the provision, certainly, of these speakers. And I'm not entirely convinced that the speakers are particularly necessary to continue that success. And as I previously, in my questioning of Mr. Khan, I think that, with modern technology, that we've got the provision of phone apps that people can download onto their phones that will remind them of prayer, and a slightly older technology, certainly older than me, would be the use of localized radio. That would afford the ability for believers to opt into having the call to prayer local to them. It would mean that those people that didn't want to hear the call to prayer would not have to do so. And I think that would be a much more equitable solution for the community as a whole, if there was some sort of provision whereby the mosque operated its own radio license to be able to do so. And I think that's something that maybe they should look into.
Thank you, Councillor Hogg. Councillor Jamil.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I am the son of one of the founding members of the first mosque in Peterborough. My dad and the group I call Pioneers in the 50s came here, set up the first mosque at 60 Russell Street, or even before that, they used to use a house. He always told me that when they applied for the first planning permission at that building, which is 60, the arguments that are being raised here now today are the same as what they were. Might set a precedent, we'll get more, oh my God, what will happen? Thankfully, our city has grown. We now have 6+ large mosques. This is just another step in that evolution. Now, I think I hear the arguments, but I think what we need to do is to give this a go rather than dismiss it. 2 years was mentioned by my colleague. I think we probably don't need 2 years. I think we mentioned 12 months. We come back and then we can review the situation. And if, as we think that, people may not complain as much or they've done it, we can then say, fine, we've had a look at it. It didn't work. It was an experiment. It didn't work. We need to do it. I, for one, am in favour of granting a temporary license or temporary permission to give this a go for 12 months. And in 12 months, review the situation. If it's worked, it worked. If it hasn't, then at least we can still say, well, it hasn't worked or it has worked and let's go with this. Therefore, I would ask committee to go against officer's recommendation and to grant for a period of 12 months and take it from there.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to comment on a few things. Councillor Hogg has said that the mosque has been around for about 20 years and why haven't they had speakers at that time? Well, what I'm going to say to Councillor Hogg is that at the time when they put an application for a mosque, it wasn't accepted by the officer. They're saying that it was a residential area. So getting the approval of a mosque was more important than getting the speakers. And I can assure you that it must have been their desire to have the speakers in place, but more importantly, they were focused on having the mosque than the speakers. You talk about alternative means of calling the prayer. Yes, in his statement, Councillor Khan has, not Councillor Khan, the chairman of the mosque has said that, yes, we have those means available, but they're not fit for purpose. I mean, as Councillor Hiller said, that why couldn't we give the timing, that you see the timing, you come earlier, but people don't hold the paperwork with them. They're engaged with their activities. So those alternative measures are not fit for purpose. Otherwise, they would pursue them. Councillor Hiller said about advertisement. I mean, I wouldn't say that calling for prayer is an advertisement. As long as we're calling for a prayer, it wouldn't be calling for selling something or advertising or something to gain any benefit from it. So as a whole, what I've said in my earlier debate is that I personally think this application does merit a temporary permission, considering that all the factors in the round, because obviously that's the best way to measure things. That's the best way to understand the diversity in the area, how people feel about it. Obviously, the officers will get complaints. What the important thing that we have to consider is it temporary? It's not permanent. Yes, I'll probably be against permanent grant of application. Why? Because we haven't got the necessary information, we haven't got the necessary research, and therefore temporary vision, I think, is fit for purpose, it's fit for this application, and I would strongly urge members to give it a chance and go against officer's recommendation and grant the application on a temporary basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, this is a difficult situation and it's a hum and ha either way. I have to say, I do agree with comments made by other councillors, particularly Councillor Hogg and Councillor Hiller. But one thing I would like to address, the idea of a temporary kind of approval for this. If it is an issue, I'm just thinking 12 to 18 to 2 years is a very long time for residents to have an issue before it can be addressed, if that makes sense. So I'm leaning towards not going with the temporary application and agreeing with the officer's recommendations, to be honest with you guys.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Anybody else wish to join the debate? Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Chair. I think we seem to be operating in a policy vacuum at the moment, because it seems as if lots of different local authorities have been doing their own thing and setting their own precedents, but there doesn't seem to be any legislation that discusses things like timings. I suppose the timings are done for religious reasons, aren't they, as well? But not the timings, but also the decibel levels and the sound. So at the moment, we're trying to walk that very fine line between something that's cultural and something that can then sit within our current sort of daily lives, really. So I suppose when you had the call to prayer, you didn't have things like gift working. It was the whole community would come together. So I can understand the impact of the call to prayer. It is about bringing everyone together, and actually having been in the Middle East and sort of experienced, and this is one of the things that I quite like, the idea of having 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 going on at the same time, because you hear that sound. As a musician, I quite enjoy that. But it's how would that impact the area that it is in at the moment, but also the community. There is a risk that it could cause that division. I suppose at the moment I'm very much on the fence about the idea of of a temporary, I suppose, a temporary mission. But it would be interesting to see what what the impact would be. Yeah, no, that's my comment so far.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair. I've switched the video off. I think one particular area of this, which is central, has to be the noise level, Chair. And much has been made of the call to prayer. To be an effective call to prayer, assuming as a layperson that it needs to cover a fair distance, and if it isn't fairly loud in 4 directions, let's not forget there's 4 speakers being applied for here, then it's not going to be particularly effective, is it? And so my concern, I think, for the residents, Muslim and otherwise, is that it's going to be, it has to, by the nature of what it's supposed to do, it's going to be a fairly loud noise. And that, I think, is a point we need to bear in mind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hiller. Anybody else wanted to come in on the debate before I move on? No. Well, you'd expect me as chair to obviously bring you back to effectively our policy, which is obviously residential amenity in this. And this is a new noise source, or potentially a new noise source. Not offensive by any means, of course. But a noise at the end of the day, and it's a different type of noise, and something that isn't there now. So obviously there must be some sort of effect. And I understand, that Environment Health are having trouble deciding because it's not there now, and there's nothing really to judge it against locally. Having said that, we are an Environmental Protection Committee as well as a Planning Committee, and there will be an effect on the environment, and certainly to people who may not like it at the end of the day. And I think to just trial it on people who may not like it, I do feel might be a tad unfair, really. I think there are, it's what sort of harm it may cause. And from my point of view, and certainly from a policy point of view, there could be harm. Certainly, I think the figure was 92 people considered it to be that it could be harmful to them. And we've heard from Mr. Khan that there are systems in place, and obviously we've heard from Councillor Iqbal that they're not fit for purpose. Well, they've, I would argue they've certainly been fit for purpose for a long time, or not fit for purpose for a long time. And maybe with the new types of technology we've got, we've mentioned, we've heard from Councillor Hogg, radio, apps, etc. I think these sort of things need to be looked at perhaps a little bit deeper. I have to come down on the side of saying that, I have concerns when 92 people have real problems. I know more people want it. I appreciate that too. But it doesn't negate the fact that some people are going to be affected and not going to like it. And from a planning and environmental protection point of view, I don't want to, I can't back a trial, and I certainly can't back full permission. I'm afraid at this point. I've not heard enough to make me change my mind. Anybody else? No. Do we have a proposal at all at this stage from anybody? Councillor Jamil, you were first.
My proposal is that permission is granted for 12 months with the review set in 12 months' time.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have a seconder? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Iqbal, are you seconding?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to second that.
Okay, fine. So, members, we have a proposal and we have a seconder on that proposal. So I'll now go to the vote. I'll call out your names one at a time.
Sorry, I think Nick just had his hand up very quickly.
Oh, did he? Sorry, I do.
That was quite an urgent.
Oh, it's just gone up. Yeah, actually on mine. Sorry. Yes, Councillor. Sorry, Mr. Harding.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Before we go to the vote, in terms of the proposal that's been tabled, in terms of the 12-month temporary consent, given that the applicant would have to procure the equipment and arrange for its installation, my suggestion was that we allow either 14 or 15 months as the temporary consent. And secondly, would the proposal include officers being given delegated authority to apply suitable conditions to that temporary consent? Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Jamil, was that you happy with that?
I'm happy with that.
Good. Councillor Iqbal, are you happy the second instant on that basis?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so we now have a valid proposal and a seconder. So we'll now move to the vote. For clarity, I'll ask each member in turn if they are for, against or abstaining. Councillor Bond.
Against.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Casey.
Against.
Councillor Hiller.
I'm against, I'm afraid, Chair.
Councillor Hogg.
Against.
Councillor Iqbal.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jamil.
For.
Councillor Jones.
Let's give it a go. For.
Councillor Rush.
Against.
Councillor Warren.
Against.
Thank you. And myself, I'm against too. Sorry to say, I don't think we've had the case proved. So I'm against too. So over to Dan, please. Could you give us the result, please?
Yes, thank you for that proposal. We have in favour 3 and against 8. Therefore, that proposal has been defeated.
Yep, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your input into that. The vote has not been approved, the application. So I think if it's okay with everybody, we'll just have a little 5-minute break. I think we've been sat there in the same place for quite a while. Maximum of 10. So let's go for 5 past, please. 5 past 3, and we'll reconvene on the next one. Thank you very much. Dan, if you can advise when everybody's back and then when we're back on, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just wait for a few people still to come back. Just waiting for Councillor Iqbal, Councillor Hogg, and Councillor Hiller.
Yeah.
I'm here, Dan.
Thank you, Councillor Hiller. Just waiting for Councillor Iqbal.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Councillor Hiller. Yeah. Okay, Chair, I think we have all members back.
Okay, everybody back? Officers all back, yeah? Will you let me know when you're back online? Are we back online? Yes, good. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we've done the first part of the previous application, which was a recommendation or a proposal to allow a trial for up to a year, which was defeated. I now need to move on to the next stage, which is actually the actual officer's recommendation. Do I have a proposal, please, on that one? Councillor Hiller.
Yes, Chair. Thank you for the invitation. I propose that we accept the officer's recommendation and don't allow this application.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Casey, is that you?
Yes, Chair, I'd like to second that proposal.
Thank you very much. So once again, committee, we have a proposal which is valid, and we have a seconder. For clarity, I'll ask each member in turn if they're for, against, or abstaining. Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Casey.
For.
Councillor Hiller.
Yes, I'm for it, Chair.
Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Iqbal.
Against.
Councillor Jamil.
Against.
Councillor Jones. Councillor Rush.
For.
Councillor Warren.
For.
And myself, Councillor Harper, I will be for that motion too. So that's the votes done. Dan, please, with the result.
Yes, thank you, Chair. For that proposal to go with officer recommendation, there was 8 in favour and 3 against. Therefore, that recommendation has been agreed.
Okay, agreement. That's agreed. Thank you very much for that. Right, at this point, I must remind you that I'm having to come away from the chair because the next 2 items I'll be speaking on. So if I could please hand over to my capable friend, Councillor Casey, please, to take the chair for me, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harper. Ooh. Good afternoon, members. We move on to item number 5.2. Mr. Harding, would you like to introduce the item?
Thank you very much, Chairman. So the application before you under this item relates to the construction of a solar farm and associated small scale development off Buntings Lane. Can we move to the next slide, please? So the application site is edged in red, and you'll immediately notice at the sort of top right-hand portion of the slide and sort of the bottom left-hand side, you've got sort of elongated sections of the red line. And that's in relation to showing to you the means of access to the proposal. So at the northern end, top of the page, the access will come into the site via an existing former slip road that's now redundant. And that slip road runs parallel to the parkway and runs all the way to the sort of southwest of the slide where it connects in with a part of the highway near Amazon building, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide. Okay, so if we move to the next slide. So this is zooming in on the bulk of the site, and this shows the layout of the proposal. And as you can see, the solar panels are running in parallel to each other, and they are facing due south, with north at the top of the page. And the slide shows that it's a bit faint on the screen, so I'll explain it to you. The application site is a hill. So the bottom of the hill is on the left-hand side of the application site, the top on the right-hand side, so to speak. So as you can see, the rows of panels run up and down at the slope rather than along the slope. And the top-hand right section of where you see all of the blue solar panels, you'll see the access road that comes off the slip roads that I was referring to you previously. So that access road runs into the site, and there's a sort of a dark area in the top right-hand corner of the site, and that's where the various service buildings are proposed to be located. And that includes a customer cabin, so that's basically for staff visiting the site. It's got some operational equipment in it as well. There's a transformer structure, there's a battery substation, battery storage buildings as well. So you have all of that sort of equipment which supports the electricity which is generated from the solar panels. Included in the proposal is extensive sort of landscaping as well, and I'll say a little bit more about that later on. Top left-hand corner of the slide, you've got a picture of the solar panels, what they'll look like, and there's a subsequent slide later in the presentation. I'll show you that later. Could you move to the next slide, please? So this is a close-up of that top right-hand section of the application site, showing the access road in and the various buildings that are located on the site. Generally speaking, they're no taller than 3 meters in height and have much the same appearance in terms of physical size as a storage container building. Next slide, please. So this is elevations of the solar panels. So they're no taller than 2.3 meters high. And in different parts of the site, they'll have different separations. So the distance between each row of panels is going to vary between 4 meters and 8 meters. So that distance will sort of vary depending upon the level of separation. Next slide, please. So here's a typical elevation of the transformer substation and switchgear unit. And as you can see, as I said earlier, it has much the same appearance as a storage container. Next slide, please. And here is the layout of the planting. So it is quite extensive. So you've got just shy of 4,000 square meters of shrub planting is proposed. You've got 2.7 thousand square meters of tree planting happening at the northern end of the site. You've got about 800 meters of hedge planting and just over 11,000 square meters of species-rich grassland being part of this application. So we'll go to a sectioned version of this landscaping scheme on the next slide. So that's the northern section. So what we have here on the sort of top of the slide, on the northernmost section, that's where tree planting is proposed. And then down the sides, you've variously got some additional shrub planting to bulk up what's there already. And also you've got hedge planting around the boundary of the site as well. The purple line that you see, that's a security fence that's going to be around the site. So that's going to vary between 2 and 2.2 meters in height. And you also have a series of CCTV cameras dotted around that boundary site as well. Next slide, please. So this is the middle section of the landscaping scheme. So on the right-hand side, you've got improved shrub planting shown by the brown, and again on the left-hand side. And also you've got the grassland planting as well, and the hedge along the boundaries to boot. Next slide, please. The bottom section, again, you've got hedge planting around the outside and the shrub planting, and also the grassland planting as well. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the access into the site. So as I said, it's making use of an existing section of roadway, which is now largely redundant. It's the best way to describe it. It's probably best to show you on one of the photographs of the site. What you effectively have is side by side two sections of highway, or former highway, should I say. On the one side, you've got sort of footway, cycleway. On the other, it's sort of redundant road. And the idea is that that redundant piece of road is going to be utilised by the vehicles accessing the site for the purposes of construction and subsequent maintenance. So these show the details of that. And perhaps the key one is on the left-hand side of the slide, you've got the middle drawing, and that shows you the intersection with the bridle way that leads down from Bunting's Lane, and is where the proposed access co-joins with the public rights of way, footways, cycleways. Because obviously that's a point where we have to deal with the interplay between vehicles visiting the site and also the passage of pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders. So in that slide there, you've got the provision that's going to be made there to make sure that the interplay between those users is going to be safe. Next slide, please. So that's a close-up of that particular arrangement. So vehicles will come down from the right-hand side, where you've got the sort of the 5 with a circle around it, and the vehicles will continue on to the left lane, and then they will reverse sort of into the site for the purposes of dropping off the construction materials. And obviously you'll have banks people there to ensure that those movements are safe. So all of that's been track changed, and Highways have reviewed that, and they're happy with the this aspect of the scheme. Next slide, please. So this top slide shows where the entrance will be to access the site off the A605. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, what you've got is 2 sections of road, and the vehicles visiting the site will use the right-hand lane in this section and go off to the left. And the bottom slide, this area here is where I said that this is where the construction vehicles and other vehicles visiting the site will co-join with cyclists, pedestrians and horse riders that are using the rights of way. So if you imagine you've turned off, as per the left-hand slide, you've gone down the section of highway, and then you arrive at this area in the left-hand side of the bottom slide, where you see the sort of cycle tracks in the snow, and then the application site is the gap between the two mounds, and you'll see the entrance to the field with the houses in the background. So that shows that area where the vehicles are going to be moving in relation to where cyclists, pedestrians and horse riders are going to be. Next slide, please. And this is the final section here. So the vehicles are leaving the site. They'll come down the bit of highway on this slide, which is on the left-hand side. So you've got the current traffic route on this slide marked with the word slow, and also to the left the arrow. So that's the normal bit of highway which is used all the time. And the vehicles will be coming out of a modified section here where you've got the concrete block. And then if you look behind the concrete block, you've got a piece of tarmac to the left and a piece of tarmac to the right. So all of the sort of pedestrians and cyclists are going to be using the tarmac on the right, and the vehicles will be using the tarmac on the left to exit the site. Next slide, please. So here we've got a photograph which shows where various photographs have been taken, so that you can see the application site from a number of vantage points, so that an assessment can be made as to whether or not the visual impact of the solar farm would be acceptable or not. So if we move to the next slide. So these are taken from the Stangram bypass towards the site. And as you can see, the views are sort of truncated by the vegetation that exists between where these photographs are taken and the application site, and vegetation around the site and on the site. Next slide, please. So these are views from the existing housing estates. And as you can see, you've got fencing and hedgerows and shrub planting, and that has the effect of limiting views from ground floor level down the slope towards where the application site is. Next slide, please. So that top slide is that section where you've got the construction and other visiting vehicles meeting the area which is utilised by pedestrians and cyclists, etc., and looking into the site. So the gateway that's in the middle of that top slide is the entrance into the application site. So you can see the application site behind that fencing, which is currently used as pony grazing. And then you've got the houses on the top of what I'll call the ridge behind the hedgerow and shrub planting. So yes, from this angle, you do get a view of the application site, but you'll recall that a planting scheme of woodland planting is proposed, broadly speaking, in this area. Next slide down is from the Buntings Lane. Could you go back for me? Next slide down is a view from the Buntings Lane footpath, again showing the broken views across the application site, and likewise in the views from the parkway. Next slide, please. And again, sort of broken views from the parkway, but you can get a view of this site from this particular location. And again, this is the entrance. You can see the gates in the bottom right-hand side of the site, and that's the entrance into the application site. So you will have a view of the panels there. But as I mentioned, we do have planting mitigation proposed, which will help break up this view. Next slide. Oh, so that sort of concludes the presentation. Could you go back to the layout plan for me, please? Yep, that's great. Thank you. Yep, thank you. So just to recap, the proposal is for a 2.93 megawatt solar farm, and the site is the site of a former Stanground landfill site. And to give you a sense of scale, 2.93 megawatts is enough to power approximately 700 homes. So it is quite a significant scale project. The site itself is located on what is identified within the local plan as being Green Wedge. Could you go back in the presentation a couple of slides to the site location plan for me? That one's fine, that one. So the Green Wedge includes not only the application site, but also the land to the left of it up to the sort of parkway. And the Green Wedge also extends a little bit to the south, but significantly north, all the way up to the railway line adjacent to the River Nene, where the council's offices are at San Martin House. The proposal comprises of the solar panels with a maximum height of 2.5 metres. They're freestanding structures. They're not fixed to the ground, and in this way, the capping that's on the landfill site won't be compromised. As I've mentioned in the presentation, the proposal does include battery storage of the energy, just in case it can't be dispatched to the grid there and then, and various inverters and ancillary equipment, which is part and parcel of this type of development. Around those structures, the battery storage, inverters, etc., there is going to be a 3.2 metre high acoustic fence, and that's in order to ensure that the noise levels emanated from this part of the development won't be detrimental to residential amenity, because you've got housing development to the right-hand side, the closest being sort of 14 metres from the boundary of this development. You've got security fencing, as I've mentioned earlier, plus the CCTV, and of course you've got the landscaping and biodiversity facilities being provided as an integral part of the scheme. The key issue in relation to this development is, well, the starting point is the relationship of this scheme in the context of the Green Wedge policy in our adopted local plan. So the area in the Green Wedge has been identified in the local plan in order to provide separation between the suburb of Stanground and the main part of the urban area of Peterborough. And I've explained sort of the extent of the wedge, so it is quite substantial. The Green Wedge policy in the plan says that development should not be allowed if the objectives of the wedge are going to be compromised. So this, as I said, the purpose of the wedge is to provide separation between Stanground and the main urban area of Peterborough. And the policy goes on to say that any application will be considered against the desire to retain the physical separation between the settlements and retain the open and undeveloped character of the land. And it also says that development proposals should be considered against the opportunity to improve green infrastructure. So undoubtedly the solar panels do constitute development, but officers' opinion is that the nature of this development is significantly different to what most people would consider as being development. So for example, it's low level in height. You've not got lots of road infrastructure being provided within it. you've got the space between the panels, and you've got extensive sort of landscaping features being incorporated into the scheme. And on that basis, we consider the proposal not wholly incompatible with the objectives of the plan policy with regard to green wedges. In addition, and as shown by this particular drawing on your screen, is that the proposal represents a loss of approximately 30% of the depth of the wedge taken from the boundary with built development, which is immediately adjacent to the right-hand side of the application site, and the edge of the highway. So that's where the turn off of the parkway meets the A605 junction near Amazon. So that's at its deepest. Obviously, the proposal includes landscaping. So whilst I've said it's approximately 30% loss of depth, it's potentially a little bit less than that once you've taken into account the proposed landscaping. As I said, officers consider that taking into consideration the nature of the development, the proposed landscaping and other biodiversity features incorporated into the scheme, that the proposal is acceptable in the context of the green wedge policy. As I mentioned earlier, in terms of the landfill status of the land, because of the bulk of the development not penetrating the ground, because these panels will rest on top rather than be sort of fixed into the ground, the integrity of the landfill site won't be compromised, so there's no pollution risk. The proposed battery storage structures are deemed to be safe. They will have to comply with other legislative requirements, so there's no concerns over safety. In terms of noise, the mitigation is to put an acoustic fence around the battery storage areas and the inverters and the switchgear, and that will mean that the noise emanating from that site won't exceed existing background levels, and therefore residents won't be able to hear any noise from that part of the development. In terms of ecology, with the proposed planting and other biodiversity measures, the scheme would actually result in a positive output of biodiversity compared to the site in its current state. And finally, in terms of glint and glare from the panels, an assessment's been made, and that's identified that the level of impact is insignificant. Some properties will have a short impact on certain months of the year, which are limited, generally speaking, to no more than 20 minutes per day. But it has to be noted that the planting that's proposed will help mitigate that glint and glare. So to conclude, Vice Chairman, we are recommending approval of the scheme. It is with conditions, and those are outlined in your reports, Chairman. We've got no updates to give you, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Thank you. We have two speakers this afternoon registered to speak. Please can I invite Councillor Chris Harper to address the committee as Ward Councillor. You will have 10 minutes in which to address the committee. Democratic Services officers will let you know when you have 30 seconds left, and then when the 10 minutes have lapsed. When you are ready, please unmute your mic.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, members, for giving me the opportunity to address you today. To begin with, I'd like to say that from a green energy point of view, I'm absolutely in support and welcome alternative energy production initiatives. However, this doesn't mean that we can lightly dismiss the huge value residents have placed on this land as being outweighed because of need. Policy LP 17 advises that permission should not be granted for a development which would result in an unacceptable loss of public or private green space, but this is exactly what is being proposed, to cover some of the green wedge in solar panels, an area identified in the local plan, as has already been heard. It provides separation, that's the whole point of it, between stand ground and the urban areas of large warehouses such as Amazon and and obviously the parkway nearby. LP22 says the Green Infrastructure Network advises that development must protect existing linear features of green infrastructure network. This effectively will be lost or certainly compromised if covered in solar panels. Policy LP28, Biodiversity and Geological Conservation, advises that development likely to have an adverse effect will only be permitted where the needs and benefits outweigh the loss, and that habitats and species of principal importance should be considered in the context of the duty to promote and protect species and habitats. Development which would have an adverse impact will only be permitted where there is need and benefit clearly outweighs the impact. Whilst plans show an actual increase of 1.16 units of biodiversity, and that is promised, the question being asked by residents is that just because we can effectively create a larger biodiversity area doesn't mean we should then upset an already established one and also destroy the actual enjoyment of local residents. There is a statement within the report that advises that there may be slight perceived loss of green space, but the underlying landscape characteristics and features such as grassland, open character and topography would not be altered. However, residents challenge this opinion on the grounds as how can a field full of solar panels possibly be considered as maintaining the character of a field. Views onto and across the open land at the proposal site were considered important from both residential and public locations. And I'm concerned as to how such impacts were not assessed from all rooms in nearby properties. The assessment has only been applied to principal habitable rooms, which in effect are ground floor rooms. Only as such, there has been no assessment from other floor windows, or if there has, there's no mitigation necessarily to prevent a problem. Just how can we dismiss the potential effects to property owners and ignore that more mitigation will be needed for higher level windows? Reflection and glare were also raised as general impacts of concern. And again, the impact has only been considered for ground floor windows of nearby properties. It is unfair to just dismiss the effect on first floor and higher level windows. And there may well be more mitigation needed to stop it. The report also advises that estimated reflections may be visible towards dwellings, as Mr. Harden has said, about 20 minutes per day for 3 months, and that this is likely to be considered to be moderate. Well, that's a matter of opinion. Residents feel that that would be too much. We all have concerns around the exit onto the highway that very well shown on the photograph was, and I don't know if you can make it out, members, but it's right on a bend, and that slip coming down is a road from the parkway where traffic is slowing down from 70 miles an hour onto that bend. There's also another road joining from the left-hand side coming under the bridge. If you've been that way onto the 605 bypass, you'll know where I mean, down by Amazon. So we've got vehicles coming out onto a road where vehicles are trying to slow down from 70 miles an hour. May only be doing 20 or 30, 40, 50, but it's a concern. Members, local residents are very fond of this piece of land. A piece of land that's been identified in the local plan, remember. It creates separation from urban part of Peterborough, so effectively gives them a nice gap between their houses and Amazon buildings and other warehouses in the parkway. It was effectively, as you know, a tip. It was an old authority tip, and it was abandoned to the wild, and wildlife has duly obliged and populated it with an array of species such as rabbits, foxes, deers, butterflies, all sorts of birds, and nearby we have great crested newts very close by. Residents are urging you please to listen to their concerns and decide whether you believe the loss of this highly valued open area, which you know is in the local plan, as necessary for the separation of stand ground from urban areas, is justified and outweighs the adverse impacts. Should you decide it does, you should also consider, do you believe the amount of mitigation proposed is enough to alleviate those undesired effects? Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Councillor Harper. Yes, members, are there any questions?
That put you all off.
Councillor Hogg.
Just a quick question. You mentioned about the slip road where the exit to the site is. I believe that slip road is actually 2 lanes wide, but it's been hatch marked off. So I'm guessing that it wouldn't be beyond the width of being able to cone off an area to force traffic onto the hatch markings, so that the vehicles coming off the site were able to filter in more gently than is currently the case.
Councillor, obviously I'm not a highways expert, but if you can, I'm sure you've seen it as you come down there, you've got effectively a blind bridge to your right hand side that traffic comes up from the IKEA direction. So I don't really know, maybe highways can advise whether they thought that would work. I think the whole point of the slip when it comes around is to give people time to look over their right shoulder and join. What I'm saying, they're looking over their right shoulder to see traffic coming on the bridge. On the left-hand side, there's a junction to them. You see what I mean? If you were coming down the slip, you would then have traffic coming from the right, which you're looking out for, and to your left, you'd have a junction right now when you're coming down the slip.
I can see that, but I mean, I'm guessing that the construction is not going to be in place for very long, and so therefore it would, you know, as a coning would the fact that slip road was coned would slow down the traffic coming off the parkway faster than they would normally do because of the coning.
Again, I'm not a highways expert. If they think that's possible, that's up to you guys and highways.
Now, Councillor Jones did have his name there, but he's taken. Okay. Do we have any other questions for Councillor Harper? No, I think that's no more questions. Thank you very much, Councillor Harper.
Thank you, Chair.
Please can I invite Mr. Tom Wolf to address the committee. You will have 5 minutes in which to address the committee. Democratic Services officers will let you know when you have 30 seconds left, and then when 5 minutes have lapsed. When you are ready, please can you unmute your mic. Good afternoon,
everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Wolf, and I'm a member of the Royal Town Planning Institute with over 30 years' experience. I represent the applicant, Cambridgeshire County Council, in this matter. I would like to start by confirming my support for the case officer's comprehensive report and recommendation to this committee. This has carefully gone through all the material planning considerations and addressed the concerns raised by local residents, some of which are correctly identified as not material to planning decisions. The report takes account of the adopted policies to provide a clear account of the planning balance and with the benefit of the full support of all statutory consultees. In addition, the applicant undertook significant local consultation on the proposal, which included 149 visitors to the webpage, 110 responses to their survey, and the 91% support for Cambridgeshire's investment in green energy. The provision of renewable energy systems are a key part of the local, national and global effort to reduce CO2 emissions and tackle the declared climate emergency. The proposal is fully aligned with the goals set out in the recently published Energy White Paper, which include accelerating the development of clean electricity generation through the 2020s. Given that City Council members declared a climate emergency in July 2019, this scheme is particularly relevant at the local level for the city. This proposal will, in effect, help Peterborough City Council and the city as a whole achieve their net zero carbon target by 2030. Planning policy is generally very supportive of proposals that seek to tackle the climate emergency, provided any and all adverse impacts are or can be made acceptable. In this case, a significant number of expert reports have been prepared and submitted to address all the likely concerns and impacts that may be caused by the proposal. And it is my view, and that of the Council's professional planning advisors and other consultees experts, that all potential impacts are considered acceptable with the imposition of planning conditions contained in section 7 of the officer's report. The former Stanground waste landfill facility is now closed and capped. This site is no longer suitable for waste disposal or any intensive development owing to the requirement to maintain the landfill cap, which protects the environment from the waste within the site. The existing use for grazing horses does not fulfill the wildlife potential for the site, which could be considered higher with improved planting and dedicated maintenance. In response to Councillor Harper's points, he highlights certain policies. In relation to LP 17, and I'm sure officers can clarify this point as it may have been picked up from the officer's report, my reading of the policy is that it only refers to public open space or public amenity space and not, as is suggested, to private space. The proposal site is a private former landfill site over which a public authority has future maintenance liabilities. LP 22 and LP 28, also raised by Councillor Harper, seek not only the protection but also the enhancement of green infrastructure. So the councillor's point is well made, but unfortunately gives no credit for the improvements that the proposal will bring and which policy requires. Research has shown that well-managed solar farms provide a haven for British wildlife. Work by the universities of York and Lancaster, which draw on over 700 pieces of evidence from 450 peer-reviewed scientific publications, conclude that when real care is taken, solar farms can deliver tremendous benefits to wildlife, pollinators, and even sustainable food production. Significant care has been taken during the design phase to benefit local wildlife, including rabbits, foxes, butterflies, birds, and great crested newts, who will continue to be able to freely roam onto and across the site as part of a green local network. Councillor Harper also refers to private views from second floor windows and the glint and glare report. But I must make clear that there is to be extensive woodland planting on the eastern boundary to mitigate any adverse impact to these views, which can be seen on the proposed landscape plan. The issue raised by Councillor Harper is in relation to the unmitigated effects. This form of woodland screening was identified and supported in the public consultation and amounts to 0.65 hectares of new woodland, which not only mitigates the moderate impact on the view from upper stories, but also will provide additional enhanced habitat for wildlife closer to people's homes.
30 seconds left.
The fencing around the site is designed to allow animals to move through the site, but not for humans, thus providing an enhanced wildlife sanctuary on site. In conclusion, the need for the proposal is one that stems from the need to decarbonise and to tackle the climate emergency. This is a necessary phase of the transition to the low carbon future that the National Planning Policy Framework seeks, and comes before you with the full support of all statutory consultees and planting mitigation. I thank you for your time, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Very much, Mr. Wolf. Members, do we have any questions? Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Mr. Wolf. In your address, I got a slight disparity between your assurance about local acceptance for this and the address that Councillor Harper gave, where it was fairly well that locals didn't actually want this. You mentioned about the website, and you suggested, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but 91% support for Cambs County Council's investment in green energy. Was that their investment in green energy per se, or was it a support for this particular development? Could you answer that?
Yeah, it's support for their investment programme across the board, which obviously includes this proposal. The proposal was part of was put forward as part of a consultation exercise that that covered a very wide area. Some of the statistics are quite impressive on how many people it would have contacted. But in terms of responses, the responses were overwhelmingly in favour of the proposal overall. As I say, there were 110 responses to the questionnaire, and most of those were looking for the use of the brownfield sites for cleaner energy, biodiversity improvement, and raising revenue for local authorities. And so our view is that there is a considerable amount of public support locally for this proposal, and that would in fact chime with many of the national polls that suggest that there's an 80% of people support the use of renewable energy, and for solar schemes, there's an 85% support for those kind of schemes. So I'm not surprised that there is support for this scheme locally. There will obviously be some people who are against it, and that is why there are some letters of objection. But overall, one would find that those who object are those more likely to write in.
Thank you for that. That's a very comprehensive response, but I'm not sure it 100%, and I'll use my own percentage now, 100% answered my question, which was you quoted 91% in support for green energy, say, but not necessarily 91% supporting this particular development. And the statistics that you gave me, I think probably bear that out. I would be a 100% supporter for green energy, but I wouldn't necessarily want a solar farm next to where I live. So I think that's, statistics are there to be used perhaps to suit any particular argument, but I thank you for your response. Thank you, Mr. Wolf.
Thank you.
Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Wolf. How can a field full of solar panels with a security fence all the way around be seen as keeping the open character of the field?
So you'll have seen the section that shows how the solar panels are aligned, and your chief planning officer went out of his way to explain that there is a variable gap to be provided between each of the rows of solar panels, between say 4 meters and 8 meters. The panels themselves are say 2 to 4 meters in width themselves. So even on a cursory consideration of that, one can easily say that there's more than 50% of the field itself will not have any development upon it. And with solar panels, what one has is the species-rich grassland, which extending underneath the panels, providing slightly different habitat to the ones to the area which lies between the panels. And those different habitats are caused by the different amount of solar gain that each area gets, and the different amount of rainfall and so forth. And so what one gets is a mosaic of habitats, which is extremely good, and if the right mechanisms are in place, are extremely good for encouraging wildlife. And I would say that the wildlife area from this scheme is going to be far greater than is currently there with the grazing of horses. So you asked whether it can still be open. I'd say it's at least 50% open on a cursory basis. And when one thinks about it in terms of its surroundings, which are screened by other shrubs and taller trees, then in fact, it doesn't impinge on the open character of the landscape in that sense either. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Chair, could I have another question, please?
Yes, you can.
Views across the open land are important to residents. Wouldn't it have been better to do an assessment from first and second floor windows?
Well, that's a good point. We have an obligation to undertake our visual assessments according to the guidance given by the Landscape Institute. And what they say is that private views of that nature are not really to be taken into account in assessing the impact of views. If it were to be a residential amenity impact assessment, then one might, but for landscape purposes, one doesn't do that. One looks at the public views and makes an assessment of that type. But we did recognise, of course, that there are views from the upper windows across the site. and we took the view that it was preferable that people maintained a long view and they could see across the site to the horizon beyond, but also that where we could, we would mitigate the view of the panels themselves by improved planting. So we hope we have struck the right balance in that regard, and people's upstairs views will be protected where they can be, but their long views will be maintained as well.
Can I have another question, please, Chair?
Go on then. Yes, just one more.
Just what this piece of land has been left open to wildlife and possible great crested newts. How will these species in future be able to access the land with a security fence all the way around? Did you do a survey before you decided to go ahead with this project? And have you read the Peterborough City Council biodiversity strategy?
Yes, that's a very good point. We did do surveys of, we did a wide variety of surveys to cover a number of protected species, including great crested newts on the site, and breeding birds and bats and badgers and what have you across the site. And the result of that is that great crested newts are present on adjoining sites, and they are likely to migrate onto this site and do their foraging in the summertime. So we have taken that into account, and the fence has been specifically designed to allow animals to access the site. And in this case, with this proposal, the site will not have humans upon it, except for occasional maintenance, whereas at the moment it has humans and horses who go on there a little bit. So it'll be more of a sanctuary to wildlife than it currently is. Yes, the Peterborough biodiversity strategy has been fully taken into account in response in our ecological responses and strategies for this site. I would say that the site is not fully abandoned, though. It is a maintained site by Cambridgeshire County Council. It has gas wells upon it, and it is subject to an ongoing maintenance regime. So just to clarify any concept that it is an abandoned or left alone site, it isn't.
Councillor Hogg.
Oops. Yeah, sorry. So yes, Councillor Rush has again answered one of my questions, certainly, with vis-a-vis the how with the fence around, animals would be able to access the site. If you can just clarify that, you know, the size of a fox or a badger would still be able to access the site with those gaps in the fence, I would be obliged. But my other question is to do with, presumably you're going to maintain the grass in some shape or form, because you don't want the grass to grow up to a point where it starts to obscure the panels themselves.
Yeah.
Are you looking for like a twice yearly cut, or you know, how is that going to be achieved?
Yes, very good questions indeed. Yes, the fence is designed to allow medium-sized mammals. It comes in a variety of sizes, and this one would allow up to medium-sized mammals, which would include badgers, but not deer. So they can get through specially created holes, if you like. In terms of the grass maintenance and the ground maintenance, that is provided. It'll be provided as part of a landscape maintenance, a landscape environmental management plan. I think in this case it is proposed for a twice yearly cut. It'll be once in spring and once after the flowers have set, in order to allow the seeds to be set, and we would hope to achieve a very species-rich grassland on the site.
Okay, so following on from that, if I may, Chair, if there's room for a fox or a badger, a medium-sized mammal, to get through, what happens when you're walking your dog and your dog finds the hole themselves and enters the site? How does the how's the dog owner retrieve their retriever?
That's a good point too. There are a number of layers of fencing, if you like. There's the existing fence, which is on site, which I think is a palisade fence, which will have holes within it, within the scrubland. And within that, there is then a security fence and, if you like, the stock fence with the mammal holes. So there shouldn't be anybody walking a dog adjacent to this mammal fence. They should always be outside the palisade fence, which is currently there now. So I suppose if somebody were to throw a ball a very long way and a dog could see it, they might follow it in, but I don't think that's particularly likely in this occasion. And I certainly hope that didn't happen.
Well, I know that particular path is one that's well used by dog owners. And you know, dogs being dogs, they tend to go off and explore. Certainly, my dog used to do the same sort of thing, and you know, after 10 minutes or so, she might come back if she was so minded. But otherwise, you'd have to call her. It may well be that there are dog owners, and I take on board that there's an element of, you know, you have to be able to control your dog if you have it off leash. But it might sort of go for a wander and get lost. How would one go about retrieving your dog if you know that it's on the site, but you can't get it to come back through the fence?
Well, I would hope there would be an emergency number that could be posted on the site to allow people to do that. But I really think that the issue is perhaps in danger of being overblown. Because as I say, there is already a security fence there, and I'm not aware of any complaints of dogs going onto the site where the horses are, as horses and dogs don't normally get on. So I would hope that the security fence is doing its job vis-a-vis dogs and the existing situation.
Thank you.
Councillor Bond.
Oh, sorry, Chair. My question's literally just been answered, so I withdraw my hand.
Legacy hand. Do we have any further questions? No, I think that concludes our questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Wolf. Thank you. You'd like to mute your microphone. Members, do members have any questions for officers? Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to the Peterborough City Council Biodiversity Strategy. The City Council recognises that biodiversity is under threat from habitat and population fragmentation, climate change and invasive non-native species. The City Council will play its part in countering these threats, working to protect and enhance sites, habitats and species of the biodiversity, including the protection of and provision of network of wildlife corridors. Ensure that biodiversity is protected and enhanced with the planning system in Peterborough and deliver the principles for diversity set out in the National Planning Guidance. All developments demonstrate no net loss to biodiversity and achieve net gains. Does this planning application go with this biodiversity strategy?
Through you, Chairman. Yes, it does. There's a biodiversity net gain of, I think it was 1.16. So there is a definite benefit. I appreciate that, you know, it's not been possible to do the normal site visits, and or you have recently or in the have a look at the site, but essentially this land is in the main pony paddock, so it doesn't really have a lot going for it in terms of biodiversity. And this proposal, whilst, yes, development is going to go on it, as part of this scheme, you've got significant additional planting that will be taking place, and that's going to be native planting, as well as the formation of species-rich grassland. So those benefits are suitably significant and in compliance with our biodiversity strategy. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Rush.
Could you explain your comment there that this piece of land isn't, I can't forget the word, and you say, isn't good for biodiversity?
Yeah, because it's predominantly used as pony paddock, that does reduce the scope of biodiversity content on that site, and what is proposed will make significant enhancements to it. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, do we have any other questions for officers? I'd like to ask one of highways. Councillor Harper made quite a few comments about the access routes and the egress routes. And I'm just wondering, how confident are you with the plans on and off the site?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think we went through some extensive discussions with the applicant on this. And indeed, they've actually submitted a stage 1 road safety audit, which sort of flagged the egress onto the slip road as a problem. But following on from those discussions, we're confident that the required visibility from that access can be achieved. And also we'll need to do sort of localized widening. So the access itself won't actually be staying as it is, essentially. We'll be looking to do improvement works. Well, we're looking for the applicant to submit this as part of condition 9, I believe, for approval before this sort of goes ahead. So they'll need to discharge that. So we are confident that sort of access onto the highway would meet the required standards.
Councillor Harper also mentioned the fact that you'd have vehicles travelling at 70 miles an hour in the process of slowing down to 60. Are you happy with the road configuration and your plans for that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, yes. From that junction, with all the required changes that should be coming forward, we're happy that the visibility displays for that access will meet the requirements for that higher speed of traffic.
Councillor Jones.
Am I right if I'm thinking of the same place? Sorry, let me deal with that. Am I right in thinking that it goes from 70 to 40 just coming off the slip road? And then there is a slip road that goes to the roundabout, if I'm talking about the same place where the egress to the site would be?
Reeves?
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, that may be the case. I don't have that information to hand, unfortunately. But we can look as part of the access and the sort of proposals that we would expect to sort of discharge that condition. We could look at doing any sort of localised temporary traffic regulation orders along those lines to meet the required standards.
Right, members, I think that concludes our questions to officers. If you'd all like to mute your mics, we'll move on to debate. Who would like to start the debate? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm always mindful when I'm making decisions in somebody else's manner in their ward. And it's always a tricky one, and especially when it comes to something as sensitive as this. And having listened to Councillor Harper, speak passionately on behalf of the Green Wedge. A couple of things that have come to light for me is the Landscape Institute mentioned by Mr. Wolf, the empirical research done by two respected universities, the fact that this area can't be developed by because of it being the next refuge tip. So of course it's this, and I'm trying to be consistent. You saw my hand up. I'm trying to be consistent. I was going to ask Chris Harper a question that in fact he can't answer, because we have to decide on what is before us. Because if we don't go in this site, so rhetorical question, if we don't go in this site, then where do we go if we're to meet our carbon efficiency? So for me, you may recall there was a mast going to be put in my ward. My question was, I'm not against the mast. What I really wanted to find out is whether that was the best position for it in my ward. And the same thing here is, if we don't put it here, and I can see arguments for and against, then where does it go? So I think the residents can rest easy in the bed that there's going to be no housing estate. The biodiversity is likely to increase. And much as for my part, much as in the previous with the Kushia, the mosque, is I'm prepared, notwithstanding it's not my ward and I don't live there, I'm prepared to give it a go, because I'm conscious that we need to do something to offset our carbon emissions. So as impassioned a plea as it was, my view is that we go with it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Chair. Just like to say that I'm not against green energy, and just remind people that this is not a Peterborough City Council application. It is but an application by Cambridgeshire County Council, because there's been a lot of comments saying, oh, Peterborough City Council are doing this again. As a ward councillor, I need to take notice of what my constituents say. With their housings local to the site, they're against it because they're going to lose their open views, and say just have a field full of solar panels in it. It is a development on a green wedge, so I'm very concerned of what is going to happen on this site. Thank you.
Councillor Rush. Councillor Hogg.
So we have got a climate emergency, and we're going to have to make some difficult decisions to reduce our carbon footprint, and essentially increasing green energy is something that can only be applauded. As Councillor Jones has said, clearly we still have to make sure that these developments, or type of developments, are on the correct site. For me, this site is currently a pony field. It's already been intimated that due to the what's underneath the surface, it's not something that could be used for many other purposes. The fact that the solar panels will only be taking up around 50% of the land, and the other 50% of the land will be sort of open, so that biodiversity will be able to flourish within the field in a way that it isn't currently doing so. And also the sort of the areas underneath the panels themselves will also be able to provide a slightly different environment for maybe different species, for biodiversity. I do take on board that the residents of adjoining housing estates will be looking out onto a field of solar panels, and that ultimately is a matter of taste. I fully understand that there are people that don't like the look of them. Personally, I don't think they're that objectionable. Again, I don't find the sort of wind turbines objectionable, but again, I also understand there are people that find those objectionable in the landscape. They're very low profile, these panels, and so therefore the kind of impact on the landscape, as it were, is fairly localized. And this is a kind of tucked away little scrap of land that isn't particularly doing anything else. So on that basis, I am minded to approve this application.
Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's just really to echo what Councillor Hogg has just said. For me, the site, it can't really be used for much else. We have a climate emergency, as the council has recognised, and the developer has, it seems to me, taken lots of steps to try and mitigate any negative effect it might have. I do appreciate that the residents, they don't like it, they clearly don't want it. However, with the planting of trees, etc., I think the shining kind of glare effect will probably be mitigated to a large extent. The fact that the wildlife can still access and exit the site is a really positive. And as Councillor Hogg said, 50% of this land is still going to be there. And rather than being a detriment to the local area, I personally think it's a positive. So I'm minded to approve it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bond. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, one of the things, and a very good point was made about the view from the first floor window. And again, this isn't a housing high-rise development. And I'm thinking, how would I feel if I lived on the edge of it? And of course, that's another thing that resonates with me quite strongly. And I forget, and I think it was Mr. Wolf or Nick Harding, said you can actually see to the far horizon. And particularly when we have the benefit, whatever you think of the Fens, the fact that, the phrase goes, you can see for days, the fact you can look over to see the far horizon and your view isn't restricted. So again, I think that is a plus when people consider this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair. Difficult one, really, isn't it? We have this sort of dichotomy between supporting a green energy installation and taking away an amount of green wedge. I listened to Councillor Bond, and I think he made some very salient points, but I think the suggestion that the land can't be used for anything else, therefore, was a little bit disingenuous. I mean, it has status. It is a green wedge, and it separates, as we've been told by Councillor Harper, with great passion on behalf of his residents, that it does separate a developed area from a commercial area, and I think that's very important. However, it's not open green space, and I think there is a difference there. I personally am a big fan of green energy. Solar panels, for me, I actually find them quite attractive, although potentially, as I said before, I wouldn't want them right next to where I live, but where I live is a rural area, and it perhaps is a little bit different from what ostensibly is a fairly developed area, potentially urban, depending on which way you look at it. I think from a biodiversity point of view, I think it's been very well explained by Mr. Wolf that the biodiversity potential of this land, this tract of land, could in fact be considerably enhanced once if this installation is in place. That impresses me. The palisade fencing with gaps large enough to allow mammals to go in and out and across, I think also impresses me. The lost dog scenario that Councillor Hogg alluded to, I'm not sure how often that would happen, but if there could be a telephone number on the fence, then maybe that would alleviate certain fears there. Our highways officers appear to be very happy with the arrangements. The environmental agenda, certainly there's a big box ticked there for Peterborough City Council. I don't think there's any question of that. It's quiet, of course. They don't make any noise to any effect, I don't think, these solar panels. It's very clean, of course. It's very clean energy. Nothing moves. So there's not going to be any distractions from that point of view. And they're being set very low. They're not affixed into the ground. So the former corporation tip or whatever it is underneath these potential panels won't be disturbed at all. I guess the impact on the residential area is relatively small. And I know that's a difficult sort of phrase, but it is relatively small. The green wedge, we've been told 50% of the land that is suggested is going to be used, and 30% of the green wedge is going to be used. So it's 50% of 30%. And to me, that's on balance is probably acceptable, given the huge benefits. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, the huge benefits of powering, up to 700 homes with very, very clean energy. And I personally, I can't lose sight of that. So I think on that balance, I would be supportive of this application.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hiller. I can see, actually, Councillor Hiller's hand is still there, but it's a legacy hand. I can see there are no more hands raised. Do we have a proposer? Have a proposal? Councillor Hogg.
I'm happy to propose that we go along with officers' recommendations and that this application is approved, notwithstanding any small issues that they need to sort of iron out with the proposal. I believe that highways had something that needed to be sorted before, so I'm happy for it to be approved.
Mr. Harding, are you happy with that as a proposal? I'm just sort of querying that highways bit at the end.
Yes, I am, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. And do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond.
I'm happy to second it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bond. Thank you. We now move on to the vote. For clarity, I will ask each member in turn if they are for, against, or abstaining. Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Hiller.
On balance, for.
Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Iqbal.
For, Chair.
Councillor Jamil.
For.
Councillor Jones.
For.
Councillor Warren.
For.
And myself, Councillor Casey, I too am for.
Councillor
Sorry,
Rush.
Chair, we've got Councillor Rush as well.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Rush.
Abstain.
Abstain. Thank you very much, Councillor Rush. Sorry. Right,
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just run through yet. So that proposal was agreed, 9 in favour and 1 abstain.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That proposal is therefore agreed.
Chair, you can move on to item 5.3.
Right, we move on to item 5.3, which is number 68 High Street, Fletton. I'd like to hand over to Mr. Harding to introduce this item.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If we can move to the next slide. So the application before you is for a rear extension to the property. You've seen from the application description that the property is going to be used as small scale HMO, for that's up to 6 people. And just to be clear, that doesn't actually need a planning permission. So you can change a dwelling, a family dwelling, into a 6-person small scale HMO without the need for planning permission. Also included in the scheme is a rear dormer window, and that doesn't need planning permission either. It can be undertaken as works under permitted development. So the property in question that's subject to the application is the end of terrace property on the slide, with the sort of skip on the front garden. Next slide, please. And this is the rest of the row. So the application site in question is the property on the left-hand side with the gentleman exiting, and that's the remainder of the row of terraced properties. It's in High Street, Fletton. Next slide, please. And this is the rear of the property. So as you can see, The property's had a number of alterations to it, and has sort of rearward extensions to it. So what you've got is the rear wall of what I'll call the main house. Then you've got a 2-story extension coming out, and then you have another single-story extension on top of that. And all the while, the property, in terms of its width and height, gets smaller and smaller. And the proposal is to remodel the downstairs so that the first floor extension will be the same width as the main part of the house, as you see it on this slide, and comes outward full width, as in there will still be that metre gap or so between the outer edge of the extension in comparison to the garden wall to the property on the right hand side, and it'll extend out a total of 10 metres when you look at the whole of the area to be remodelled. But in actual fact, in terms of the additional depth that's created compared to what's now, that's approximately an additional 3 metres, or should I say 3.3 metres, beg your pardon. Next slide, please. So that's a view of the relationship with the neighbouring property. As you can see, they've got a series of outbuildings adjacent to the boundary fence. The proposed single-storey extension is going to be 3 metres in height, so it will stand proud above the boundary fence. But given the existing outbuildings in the neighbour's garden, it's not felt that the height of the structure and it's the fact it's going to be built along the boundary wall, it's not considered that that would have an overbearing relationship with it or cause any excessive overshadowing. Next slide, please. So this is sort of standing, looking towards the neighbouring property. And this, as you can see, shows the last bit in the jigsaw, so to speak, of the various extensions that there are to the host property. And as I've mentioned, the proposed extension would be the full width of the existing residential property out towards the back, and would finish approximately 3.3 metres off the back of that rear wall of that small single-storey extension, which is a lavatory. Next slide, please. So that's a closer look at the back of the property. So the side wall of the single-storey extension would be approximately where you see on this picture the interplay between the sort of gravel path and the sort of roof slates that are on the wall. So that marks approximately sort of the width of the proposed single-storey extension. Next slide, please. So that shows, again, the relationship with the property to the left, and also to the right-hand side. You can see that you've got a 2-storey height building on the right-hand side and a single-storey extension to it. Next slide. And again, that shows the relationship between the two properties. As you can see, a high wall separates the two properties. Next slide, please. And this is a schematic showing the development. So as you can see, you've got about a metre wide path leading front to back. The wall you see that's sort of ghosted is the boundary wall with the property to the right-hand side. The dormer on the rear of the property, it's in roof, that's permitted development. It steps down to a first floor extension that exists already. So the area of flat roofscape is partly made up of increasing the width of what's there already, so it's the full width of the house, and extending it out 3.3 metres rearwards. As you can see in terms of windows, bedroom windows on the side elevation look towards the boundary wall and also out into the garden. There's no issues of loss of privacy for the neighbours, and there's no issue of overbearing or overshadowing on the neighbouring properties either. Next slide, please. So that shows the ground floor existing layout, and just to recap, you can see how the rear of the property sort of steps away from the rear wall of the main house and steps gradually inwards. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. It's best to look at the plan on the right-hand side. It's a little bit clearer. And again, that shows the full width proposed extension, which mirrors the width of the main part of the house. And it extends 3 metres rearward of the last piece of the existing extension to the property. Next slide, please. And that shows the layout of the ground floor, first floor and loft conversion, showing the bedrooms that are going to be provided. So that's 6 bedrooms, so it's a 6-person small scale HMO. Next slide, please. And here are the elevations of existing. Next slide, please. And proposed. But you've effectively seen those through the CGI image of the proposal. So, Chairman, we are recommending approval of the application. The rear extension doesn't have any negative impact on the amenity of the neighbouring properties. We've had representations relating to the fact it's going to be used as a small-scale HMO, but as I've explained, that doesn't need planning permission, and therefore impacts such as the impact on car parking, etc., can't be taken into account because this property can flip between being used as a family dwelling in its extended form or flip back into use as a small-scale HMO without the need for planning permission, and therefore the impact in terms of the need for any additional car parking is not a matter we can reasonably consider in the determination of this application. So I shall conclude my presentation there, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Members, we have 2 people registered to speak on this item. Please can I invite Councillor Chris Harper to address the committee. He knows this speech already, but I'll go through it. You have 10 minutes in which to address the committee. Democratic Services Officer will let you know when you have 30 seconds left and when the 10 minutes have lapsed. When you're ready, I can see you've unmuted your mic. When you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, could I just apologise for bringing this to committee? I brought it because it's extremely important from a city and a local point of view, and this gives me the chance to represent my community by talking to you. Now, officers have rightly advised, as Nick has just done, that the objections raised against the application all relate to the proposed change of use of property to a 6-person HMO, and that this is in accordance with the applicable Town and Country Planning Act and therefore does not require planning permission. And further, because this application is for a building extension only, the objections raised are not a matter to be considered. And as Chair, I wouldn't try to change what it is. However, as a ward councillor for this particular part of Fletton and a city councillor more widely, I'd be failing in my duty if I allowed this to go ahead without bringing to the attention of this committee and more widely the full council the fact that we have an ever-increasing problem of uncontrolled expansion of HMOs due to the fallback position that's been mentioned of permitted development from the Act. not just in Fletton, but across the city. And for this reason, I ask for your indulgence while I justify that claim on behalf of my constituents. To be clear, I and the residents that have submitted their objections are not against HMOs. They are a useful extension to the housing offer, and where consideration to the wider community is given, particularly with regards of overparking, litter, ASB noise, there is no justified reason to object to them. I'd like to start by providing some context regarding the pressure currently being exerted in the Fletton area in particular. According to the HMO register, there are currently 5 HMOs with 5 or more persons in the Fletton area, with a further 15 HMOs waiting to be inspected and passported from a selective licensing to a mandatory HMO license. So in total, there are currently 20 HMOs of 5 or more persons. It would be reasonable, therefore, to suggest that this will likely lead to a large amount of additional vehicles that need somewhere to park, but under the Act, the council is currently powerless to control it. Fletton High Street and the side streets that lead off it, those who have been in the ward and have seen it, are already at saturation point, particularly in the evenings and the weekends, and pose a real risk to motorists, cyclists and pedestrians trying to cross. The chicane effect being caused by the sheer number of vehicles along its whole length make it very difficult to navigate for pedestrians, and even more so because it's a main bus route. So any further increase in vehicle parking would only compound an already serious problem. And yet the applicant has unwittingly announced the fact this is a distinct possibility. I trust members have seen the photos that were submitted by the applicant and read the wording used in the communication sent to the planning officer. And therefore I draw your attention to the fact that in both plans and the photographs submitted, the rooms are all shown to have double beds. So while they may well advise that when they address you later, that the photographs and plans offer illustrative purposes only, they have disclosed and confirmed the real possibility and fears of local residents that there is a potential here for 12 people to reside at this address. Now, if you also couple this with a quote from the applicant that they are aimed at higher end of the professional market, it would be reasonable, I believe, to suggest that the likely chosen method of transport used by high-end professionals could well be cars, but there simply is nowhere left for them to park. Close by in Princes Street, literally just around the corner, a new 4-person HMO has just in the last couple of weeks been registered, and within days of doing so, parking problems have resulted. This then went to the PES office and they effectively said, contact your local councillor. There's nothing they could do. Regarding bin contamination, this has been brought up. There is a regular problem of HMOs in the area, despite the efforts of landlords. The bins overflow and an increase in the litter in the streets. Just last week, for the umpteenth time, a property on Fletton High Street has seen its large green bins rejected again by Aragon due to contamination, and inevitably, as before, we'll now see overflowing bins next week before this can be resolved. The fact we have a particular community litter picking group on Fletton High Street just shows what a problem we've got and what the potential is for this work to increase. I obviously hope from that the landlord will, of course, manage the property to prevent any further increase. Members, I understand your hands are tied with regard to HMOs of up to 6 persons, and they are considered permitted development under this Act. I ask that you consider carefully the wording used in the officer's report, which states that the extension in itself would not increase the potential maximum occupancy of the property above and beyond that which does not need permission. However, as I've just brought to your attention, there is evidence in the plans and photographs that disclose a worrying potential of occupancy level well in excess of 6 that the Act allows without, so if it was more than 6, they have to go for planning permission. But you can see my point of view, you could potentially have 12 of planning permission. There is no planning reason to object to the building extension itself, no problem with that. But whatever you decide this afternoon, I hope you'll appreciate where I'm coming from and the content of my address and understand that residents have justified concerns. The increase in cars and vehicles won't be welcome and will just cause even more problems. And they agree with me that we need to work, and I hope you, will agree with me that at some point we need to work together as a council to seek a change to this Act as quickly as possible so we can take back control, particularly with regard to parking from HMOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harper. I think you had lots of attentive ears there. Members, would you like to ask Councillor Harper any questions? Councillor Hiller.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Chris, for the second time. you made some very, very valid points, and I think the chair was absolutely right. If there was anybody, member of this committee, that wasn't listening intently and had a huge sympathy with what you were saying, I would find that difficult to believe. The proliferation of HMOs is getting out of hand. But my question to you, Chris, would be that it is permitted up to 6 occupants. Will you, in as much as you can, will you be keeping an eye on this property to see whether, in fact, there is any excess of 6 at some time in the future?
Thank you, Councillor. I've spoken to residents throughout the area for all the different HMOs, and I find it disappointing, having spoken to officers within the pest side, that it is down to residents to keep an eye on properties. And they've said they will. I mean, that's all we can do. I don't want to be people sniping and watching all the time, but if it becomes out of hand, of course, we will report it to the council to deal with it. Yes, of course.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I'm going along with Chris with this because, as I say, there's 6 rooms, 6 double rooms. So that's going to be 12 people. It's going to be horrendous parking down there, which it is now. And I'm not agreeing with it. So that's my bit.
Is there a question?
Well, no, I'm just going along with Chris with it. Right, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bond.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's not really. I don't really have a question. It's just to sympathise with Councillor Harper. He has done very well representing his community, and like he says, our hands are tied. I will one thing I would say. Personally, I live in a flat and I have a double bed and I live by myself. So hopefully, not every one of them will be kind of a couple of people living in them. But just to say, I do sympathise with you, and I wish we could do more. Basically, so
could I answer that, Chair?
Yes, if you can find a question.
Well, it wasn't really a question, but just to say that all I was highlighting was the potential from the drawing itself shows you what can happen, not just this HMO and others. And I totally understand your hands are tied, and I've got nothing against this particular extension. I'm just trying to get, the reason I took this opportunity was for my constituents, the potential is there, and unwittingly it's been shown to you all today in plans and photographs. So that's it.
Yeah, just to come back on that. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I see the potentials there. I just got my fingers crossed that not every one of them will be double. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The potential could well be there. So
as are the residents, Councillor Bond.
I think
they're the important ones.
Members, have we got any questions for Councillor Harper before we move on? No? Thank you very much, Councillor Harper.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Please can I invite Mr. Adamczyk to address the committee. Mr. Adamczyk, you'll have 5 minutes to address the committee. Democratic Service Officer will let you know when you have 30 seconds left and then when 5 minutes have lapsed. When you're ready, I can see you've unmuted your mic.
Yes.
You can proceed.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors and committee members. My name is Dominic Adamczyk, one of the owners of the property. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk today. I'm here to talk to you about our development in Fletton at 68 High Street. The application seeks approval for the ground floor rear extension. As has already been detailed by Mr. Harding, the sole area of consideration for this application is whether to grant permission to extend the rear of the property by 3.3 metres. I understand there are 3 areas of concern for this application. The first is transport, or the parking standards. The second is urban design in the public realm, making sure our proposed development is in keeping with the character and appearance of the site and surrounding areas. And the third is neighbour amenity provision. It does not affect our neighbours' amenities in any way. Following the review by the local planning officer, it has been agreed that our application meets all 3 of the required conditions and has therefore recommended our proposal for approval. Regarding the 3 conditions, firstly, it is noted in the planning report that the proposed extension does not in itself generate an additional parking demand. Thus, we meet the first area of concern, the transport and parking guidelines. Secondly, it is noted that the proposed extension does not cause unacceptable harm to the character of the site or surrounding area. Thus, it meets the second area of concern, urban design and public realm. It is finally noted the proposed extension would not result in an unacceptable harm to the amenities of the neighbouring occupants. Thus, we meet the third area of concern, the neighbour amenity provision. We pride ourselves on our values of honesty, integrity and total transparency in the way that we work, and have been honest and open in the fact that we'll be using this property as an HMO for a maximum of 6 people, even though that part falls under permitted development rights. We're proud of the developments we create and the high quality and large spacious accommodation that we provide for our tenants, which is the reason we're requesting the extension. Given the multiple lockdowns, an increase in people working from home and various restrictions imposed on movement over the last 12 months, we feel it's important landlords are given the best chance of creating the most spacious, usable and sociable environments available for their tenants, as it aids the reduction in anxiety, poor mental health and being part of a household rather than just living alone. With your support in approving this application, councillors, the impact, benefit and value that will be added on the surrounding area, neighbours and the tenants within the property will only improve on our alternative permitted development option, still creating an HMO for 6 people, but it will be less spacious. We adhere to all the regulations for HMOs set by the Environment Agency, and the HMO Licence Agency grants will be for a maximum of 6 people. We're happy to put this point in as a condition of planning being granted, and will provide evidence of this via the 6 individual sole occupancy tenancy contracts. The application's approval will increase the size of the ground floor space and enable us to provide every bedroom with a private bathroom, which the alternative permitted development option does not. It will increase the bedroom sizes in 2 bedrooms, one of them increasing from 10 square metres to 14 square metres. It will also enable us to provide a bigger, more usable and inviting communal kitchen area, increasing the size from 9.7 square metres to 15.5 square metres and adding in a seating and television area. We also provide 3/4 width beds, which are slightly larger than single beds, not doubles, to provide more comfort to our tenants. This will attract like-minded tenants, including IT professionals, doctors and hospitality executives of varying levels of seniority within the surrounding businesses. And the larger communal space will provide a greater sense of community and friendship within the property. We understand there are some concerns about the property becoming an HMO, with 2 objections raised from the neighbours. And while they do not affect this planning application, we would like to address those concerns. We believe our properties challenge the current stigma surrounding the term HMO. And because the high standard of accommodation we provide, we attract desirable tenants. We've provided photos of this high standard, and I would like to extend an invitation to those who would like to visit the properties. In regards to parking, we would like to offer reassurance. The lifestyle of people living in an HMO is a city-based life with easy access to their place of work, usually by bike or within walking distance, and therefore less chance of owning a car. And we provide secure bicycle storage in the back garden to encourage cycling. Also, the number of parking spaces needed in a 6-bed, 6-person HMO can be comparable to a residential family property with 3 or 4 adults living there. Therefore, we believe it would not significantly impact the local area. And we heavily vet all applicants and conduct interviews with them to make sure that they have solid references, which are provided even before we consider the application. We work with the best letting agency in the city, who's on hand 24/7 to quickly resolve any tenants' issues. And we make sure we lead the way with the amenities provided for our tenants, including ensuring adequate refuse facilities are provided and kept on top of. I'll close with the following statement. The sole approval we're seeking for this application is your permission to extend the ground floor by 3.3 metres, and that your support will enable us to provide an improved and more spacious environment. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We believe this property will become an asset to the area, and with our thorough vetting procedure, we truly believe the tenants will become a positive addition to the local community. In line with the Planning Department's recommendation for approval, we also ask you to grant approval to this application for the extension. Thank you very much, councillors, and I welcome some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Adamczyk. Members, any questions? Councillor Hogg.
So I just want to kind of drill down a little bit on the proposal, if I may. In terms of, you say that you are going to limit the property to 6 tenants only. How do you propose to police tenants moving in, subsequently moving in partners at a later stage? And the other question is, how many cars do you think will be utilised by the residents of the property, and how would you look to limit that figure as well?
Thank you for the question. So firstly, our managing agent provides clear directions and guidelines. He actually has them plastered when you first walk into the house about the maximum occupancy, being one person per room. We have cleaners going around on a bi-weekly basis, so they always keep an eye on the property anyway. And just to point out that the HMO, the license will only allow us to have 6 people in there. So if that goes over by one person, then we're encroaching on our HMO regulations. So it's just not a possibility. It's not going to be a situation that we'd ever want to find ourselves in. So our managing agent is always on the case. He goes over there quite a lot. With regards to the parking, I've asked my managing agent just to confirm the average amount of cars, and that does depend on the location. So if we're talking the up by the Morrisons, I can't remember the name of the area, Woodston, I think it is. That would probably be 4 or 5 cars for an HMO. In the city area, there's usually about 2. And because of the area that we're in with the high street in Fletton, and being so close to the Amazon distribution centre, the Debenhams distribution centre, hopefully that's still going to go with obviously the local news, and also the IKEA distribution centre, we would anticipate that there will be a lot more people that are walking and using bikes. We don't encourage people to have cars. Of course, you know, we're not going to be able to say to people, you cannot bring a car.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick one. With the current COVID situation and stuff going on, I know you said that your letting agent and cleaners and stuff, they regularly visit the property, but is that something you can continue to do during the lockdown? Just quickly.
That's a very good question, actually. If I'm honest, I'll have to refer that answer to my managing agent to confirm that for definite. But I don't know, if I'm honest.
Okay,
So
no, it's not a problem. That's no problem.
Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dominic. Your reasoning about, in the report, it says you are aiming for professional market high-end workers, and your rationale is now that they would be working at the local IKEA warehouses. I just can't relate to that professional high level people will be working in that them establishments. So I think your rationale for saying they won't have cars is completely wrong. I'm sure that if you was a professional high-end person, you would all have a car. What do you think to that?
Well, to come back on that, I'm saying that we are in close proximity to those warehouses, and there are senior managers working in those warehouses that are in HMOs at the moment. So those people don't have cars. With regards to people being in a more higher level and senior position, yes, there will be people that do have cars, but the majority of, well, sorry, not the majority, the HMO side of things, more people are city livers, so they generally use public transport. So you are right that with more senior people comes a higher level of earning, and therefore there's potential for having a car. But with the analysis that I've done with my managing agent, that's not exactly the case. There's usually around 50% of the property that have cars, which can be comparable to a residential family.
Thank you. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. To you, thank you for your presentation, Dominic. If I'm correct to understand that in your presentation, you said that you were going to increase the size of the rooms. And I'm sure you mean the bedrooms as well, and you're going to have ensuite. Am I correct?
That's exactly right, yes.
Right. So from a layperson's point of view, if you're going to increase the size of the bedrooms, you're going to have ensuite. Doesn't that give a clear message that the people who are going to move in, they are bound to have other people joining them? Wouldn't that be the right thing to think? I'd just like to have your comment on that.
I think it's a valid point, and I think that with other HMOs in the Peterborough area, in fact countrywide, if they're not managed properly, then there is a strong chance that could happen. It doesn't necessarily mean straight away that there are going to be dual occupants in a room. And as I said, with our ASTs, the contracts that are in place, it clearly states that you are not allowed to have more than one person in a room. It's a sole occupancy. And the planning that we're going for at the moment, it's not about increasing the level of occupants. It's purely to keep that as 6 people, which is what we'd be having if we go ahead with our alternative option under permitted development. So it'll always be a 6-person HMO. The difference here is just purely about, as you've already pointed out, 2 other rooms being able to have en suites and being able to have larger bedroom areas, and the kitchen being bigger, which is a much better, usable communal space.
Can I ask a further question, please?
Yes, you can. Members, I'd just like to remind us all that actually that we're not here really to give permission on an HMO as such. We're looking at a planning application for an extension on a building, and we need to be cognizant of that.
In that case, I'll withdraw my question.
Members, do we have any questions for the applicant on the planning application at hand? No, thank you very much, Mr. Adamchi. I'm just looking for where you are on my screen. Thank you very much for your presentation and for answering all the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Members, we now move to the next part of our proceedings, where we ask questions of officers. Councillor Jimin.
You know, I've listened to both parties, and Chris, I know exactly what you're talking about. Amjad will tell you we have the same type of issues in our ward, and to be honest with you, once it's done, there's not a lot that we can do. So my question to the officer really is that, legally, if 12 people go and live there, is there any sanctions?
Through you, Chairman, I got disconnected from the meeting, so I don't know whether or not that was a question directed for me.
It was. I'm saying, is there, if at the moment, Dominic's assuring us, and to be honest with you, I don't have any reason to doubt him. He's saying that it will be 6 people, but if 12 people start living there, is there anything that we can do as part of the HMO license or anything like that? Anything the local authority can do to stop that happening?
From the planning point of view, yes, we can take enforcement action if he goes above the 6 figure, even with an altered house. If they go above the 6 figure, then what we would do is launch an investigation. If it happens that 7 people are in there without any detrimental impacts, then that would have to be a consideration in the determination as to whether or not we did take enforcement action, but there is the potential there for the council to do so. I can't speak especially learnedly from the housing perspective, but if the property is only licensed as a small scale HMO and it breaches that license, then potentially, yes, they would be able to take enforcement action as well.
Yeah, can I come back on that?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, I understand why we're here and why this is being brought here. And in terms of planning law, I don't think there's anything that we can really object on. So my proposal is that we accept officer recommendation and permission is granted.
Councillor Jamil, we haven't moved on to debate yet. Okay. We're still at the questions for officers stage. Do we have any further questions for officers? No, I think we ought to move straight on to debate, and I think this is, and I'd like to remind members that we're here to debate the planning application at hand, and not be distracted. Councillor Hogg.
Okay, so this whole application, or certainly in terms of this house, I've kind of two views on. I think as a city we are in dire need of good quality housing for our residents, and I think certainly if you were to, you're looking at the application as it stands, which is what we should be doing. I think Mr. Adamczyk should be applauded for looking for a solution that gives slightly more than your average, let's see how many rooms we can cram into a building type of application of HMO that we have seen in parts of our city. The fact that these rooms are fairly roomy, and the fact that they are they've got ensuite bathrooms does tend to sort of separate them out from some other HMOs in the city, and I think that's to be applauded. I think that's a sort of a direction of travel that we should be encouraging. What HMOs that we have, because at the other end of the scale, we have there's a huge gap between being able to live in a shared household and being able to have your own 1-bedroom flat or 2-bedroom flat or what have you. Certainly from when I first stepped on the property ladder, the bottom rung seems to be perilously high for people to reach out for, and the HMO is a kind of solution of our times for people to be able to live independently. As has previously been said, obviously that this is about the extension and whether or not we feel the extension meets our planning applications. And I think that even Councillor Harper, whilst he has voiced the view that ultimately that many people living in that kind of area alongside other HMOs is a problem for him, and I think it's a problem that a lot of us share. That ultimately, it's how many cars can be fit into a street compared to the number of people living in the houses. But our government, rightly or wrongly, has left us with little in the toolbox to be able to kind of make those decisions. Ultimately, I will be approving this application on the basis of maybe to a certain extent our hands are tied. We can't look at the wider picture in terms of cars, etc., etc. So I will leave it to somebody else to talk now.
Thank you, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, I enjoy this committee, and I really do enjoy it because it's endlessly fascinating. I think I try and keep an open mind, and I walk in and somebody says something that triggers another thought process. In this particular instance, thank you, Chair, for bringing us back to the fact this is a planning application, and we have to judge that on its merits. As tempting it is to get into a whole debate about HMOs, which most of us can relate to. So in this particular, it suffice to say that as what I've seen, the descriptions from Nicholas Harding and everybody else, I find the application is okay. I can't see anything wrong with it. But if we move across the debate about HMOs, we go off on a paradigm. We just slip into a parallel universe, and it's not a place where we can or should go today. So my contention is we approve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair, and I find myself agreeing with Councillor Jones. Despite your sage advice, Chair, we still, we discussed the HMO issue ad nauseum, and it isn't an issue on this particular application as long as Mr. Adamczyk keeps to his 6 or thereabouts. It's not a problem. It was good of Mr. Adamczyk to suggest we condition up to 6. Well, we can't do that. Permitted. We could, if it goes over the 6, it appears, Mr. Adamczyk, that our licensing team will be crawling all over the property, and I'm sure the ward councillor, Councillor Harper, will ensure that happens. I have huge sympathy. In my ward, it doesn't tend to happen. In the more urban wards, the HMO issue is prevalent, and whatever you call them, Mr. Adamczyk, if you don't like HMO, that's the term that we use, I'm afraid. With regard to the application, it's an application for an acceptable, in my opinion, and an acceptable extension to the property, 3.3 metres from what's there currently, with an additional width. I don't think impacts on any of the surrounding properties at all. The conversation about additional cars and whatever, I mean, these are Victorian houses, when cars weren't prevalent. So, any car in a Victorian terrace is perhaps going to impact on the surrounding locale. So, in brief, Chair, I am supportive of application because desirably we can't really be anything but supportive, in my opinion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, I see no more hands raised. Do we have a proposal? Councillor Jamil.
I come back to the proposal I made a few minutes ago. We go with officer's recommendation on this one.
Thank you, Councillor Jamil. We have a proposal. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hogg.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. We now move on to the vote. For clarity, I will ask each member in turn if they are for, against, or abstaining. Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor Hiller.
Application.
Sorry, Councillor Hiller, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm for the application. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did there. Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Iqbal.
For.
Councillor Jamil.
For.
Councillor Jones. For. Councillor Jones.
Yes, sorry, I said for. Yes. Thank you.
Councillor Rush.
Against.
Councillor Warren.
For.
And myself, Councillor Casey, I am for. Dan, can we have the results, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so the proposal, there was 8 in favour and 2 against. Therefore, the proposal is agreed and carried.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for the proposal is therefore agreed. Thank you, members, and I think that brings our meeting to a close. I think we've had a good debate and we've had a good discussion, and actually it's been a varying discussion, and I've certainly enjoyed that meeting. I hope you all have too. I think we've got a meeting possibly in 3 weeks' time, but we'll find out. Thank you very much. I'd like to bring the meeting to a close, and thank you to everyone who's been watching on YouTube.